If you're ready to rest, you're in the right place. Close your eyes, relax your body, and drift into a slower time. You can also let us know in the comments where in the world you currently are and what time it is for you. You're standing in the dusty, sun-baked expanse of 19th century Australia, where the land stretches out like a giant's canvas and the air buzzes with the promise and peril of a new world. You, my friend, are about to discover the wild, rough-and-tumble life of a bushranger, a peculiar breed of outlaw born from the grit and grime of colonial hardship. Now, if you think this is some romantic ballad of noble rogues and dashing escapades, hold on to your hat, because reality's about to deliver a swift kick. Australia in the 1800s wasn't exactly the land of opportunity, more like a land where opportunity had taken a long vacation. After all, the British Empire decided to dump its unwanted over here, using the continent as a giant sunlit prison. By unwanted, I mean convicts. 165,000 of them to be precise, shipped off between 1788 and 1868. Talk about a one-way ticket to nowhere. These folks weren't exactly hardened criminals, mind you. Many were petty thieves and debtors, victims of Britain's harsh social and economic realities. But when you mix desperation with the wide-open Australian wilderness, you get bushrangers, outlaws who threw caution to the wind and took to the bush. The economic backdrop? Oh, it was a real charmer. The gold rushes of the 1850s brought some sparkle, but before that, the colony's economy was about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. Land was cheap if you could snag it, but actual cash was as rare as a polite kangaroo. The harsh colonial conditions meant that life for the average convict-turned-settler was a daily grind of survival. Many found themselves working off sentences as assigned labourers on vast estates, where they were treated only slightly better than the livestock they tended. So, why bushranging? Why leave what little security you had to become a fugitive? Well, consider the allure of freedom in a place where every other path seemed to lead to a dead end. For some, it was the only way to thumb their noses at a system that had already thrown them to the wolves, and, frankly, there weren't many options. You could toil for a pittance, hoping to eventually scrape together enough to start your own farm, or you could take your chances in the wild. Life as a bushranger was no picnic, though. Sure, the tales of daring heists and Robin Hood-like figures make for great stories, but the truth is, it was a life laced with danger and desperation. The romanticized view of bushrangers as lovable rogues overlooks the grim reality. They were often violent, always on the run, and living in constant fear of capture. The bush, with its unforgiving terrain and unpredictable weather, was both refuge and adversary. Think of it as a deadly game of hide-and-seek, where the stakes were your freedom or your life. Remember, this was a time before GPS, drones, or even halfway decent maps. The bush was as treacherous as it was vast, a sprawling labyrinth of dense forests and open plains. Some bushrangers became legends due to their uncanny ability to disappear into this wilderness, evading capture thanks to intimate knowledge of the land. Others weren't so lucky, finding themselves either caught or succumbing to the elements. And what about the law? The colonial authorities weren't exactly twiddling their thumbs. They had troopers, think of them as proto-cops, who were as tough and tenacious as the bushrangers themselves. Equipped with little more than sheer grit and maybe a horse, these guys patrolled the wilderness, tasked with bringing in the outlaws. It was a cat-and-mouse game on horseback, and not the kind you'd want to play if you valued your neck. Interestingly, the public's view of bushrangers was a mixed bag. To some, they were folk heroes, symbols of rebellion against an oppressive establishment. To others, they were little more than common thieves who deserved the hangman's noose. This duality added to their mystique and cemented their place in Australian folklore. In this land of extremes, where the sun could scorch you by day and the cold could bite by night, every bushranger's tale was a testament to the sheer will to defy the odds, to grasp at freedom with both hands, even if it meant living one step ahead of the law. So, as you lace up your dusty boots and prepare to step into this world, remember, the life of a bushranger is not for the faint-hearted or the dreamer. It's a tale of grit, guile, and a whole lot of gall. Now, if you think the life of a bushranger was all swashbuckling adventures and dashing escapes, let's take a closer look at the nitty-gritty of their day-to-day existence. Because, spoiler alert, it wasn't all gold and glory. First off, consider the logistics of living on the lam in 19th century Australia. We're talking about a time when your GPS was the stars above, and your Uber Eats was whatever you could hunt, gather, or steal. The bush was both a sanctuary and a survivalist's nightmare. Imagine trying to find dinner in a landscape where everything either bites, stings, or wants to kill you. Bushrangers lived in makeshift camps hidden deep within the labyrinth of the bush, far from prying eyes. These weren't your Instagram-worthy campsites with fairy lights and cozy campfires. Nope. Think more along the lines of shelters hastily constructed from bark and branches, a sort of rustic minimalism that wasn't by choice. The constant threat of discovery meant they had to stay light on their feet, ready to pack up and disappear at a moment's notice. Privacy was a luxury they couldn't afford, as even the friendliest neighbor might be tempted to turn you in for a shiny bounty. Speaking of bounties, let's talk economics. Crime, as it turns out, does pay, just not as handsomely as you'd hope. A successful stagecoach robbery, for instance, might net a gang of bushrangers a small fortune in gold sovereigns or banknotes. But before you start thinking of riches beyond measure, remember that wealth in the bush came with its own set of challenges. Currency had to be carried, hidden, or quickly spent, lest it become an incriminating burden. And even then, the spoils were split among the gang, meaning no one was exactly retiring to a private island. But how did they pull off these heists? Well, bushrangers were nothing if not resourceful. The classic stagecoach robbery involved a mix of audacity and strategy. The bushrangers would pick a secluded spot on a well-travelled road, often using fallen logs or rocks to force the coach to stop. Then, armed with pistols or muskets, no six-shooters here, just good old-fashioned flintlocks, they'd emerge from the undergrowth, demanding the driver's cooperation. It was a high-stakes game of bluff and bravado, relying on the element of surprise and the sheer terror of being on the wrong side of a loaded gun. And let's not forget the tools of the trade. Apart from their trusty firearms, bushrangers carried basic survival gear: knives, tinderboxes, and flasks for water, or, more often than not, rum. Clothing was practical, designed to withstand the harsh conditions of the bush. Picture long coats for warmth and protection, wide-brimmed hats to shield against the relentless sun, and boots sturdy enough to trample through the toughest terrain. Their gear was as much about survival as it was about anonymity. A distinctive piece of clothing could spell disaster if recognized by a witness. Yet, despite the dangers and discomforts, bushrangers weren't entirely isolated. Enter the bush telegraphs, a network of informants and sympathizers who played a crucial role in the bushranging ecosystem. These were folks who, for a variety of reasons, were willing to lend a hand to the outlaws. They might be disgruntled settlers with a grudge against the authorities, relatives looking to protect their own, or simply opportunists looking to profit from the exchange of information. Through these networks, bushrangers could receive warnings about trooper movements, learn of wealthy targets, and even secure supplies. But why would anyone risk aiding criminals? Well, let's just say loyalty was a valuable commodity, often bought with the promise of shared spoils or the thrill of sticking it to the man. This clandestine support system was a lifeline for bushrangers, allowing them to stay one step ahead of the law. It was a delicate dance of trust and deception, where betrayal was always a lurking possibility. After all, the promise of a bounty could tempt even the most steadfast ally. Yet for all their cunning and charisma, bushrangers were ultimately fighting a losing battle against an increasingly organized colonial law enforcement system. The authorities were no slouches when it came to catching their man. They employed Aboriginal trackers whose unparalleled knowledge of the land turned the bush into less of a hiding place and more of a hunting ground. These trackers could read the landscape like a book, following trails invisible to the untrained eye, making it that much harder for bushrangers to remain undetected. The life of a bushranger was a constant balancing act between the rush of freedom and the reality of life on the run. Every day was a gamble, every decision a roll of the dice that could lead to either fortune or the gallows. It was a world where the line between legend and reality blurred, where the romanticism of rebellion clashed with the harsh truth of survival. As we continue to explore this audacious chapter of history, remember that behind every storied adventure lies the grit and grime of real life, a testament to the indomitable human spirit and the relentless pursuit of freedom, even when the odds are stacked sky high against you. Now, speaking of blurred lines between legend and reality, let's dive into the tangled mythology of bushrangers with a special nod to the infamous Ned Kelly. If you've got a soft spot for anti-heroes, Kelly's your man, a symbol of defiance wrapped in a suit of homemade armor, a man who straddled the line between villain and victim with all the subtlety of a kangaroo in a china shop. Before we cast Kelly in the leading role of our bushranger drama, let's set the stage with a little myth-busting. Contrary to popular belief, bushrangers weren't all rugged Robin Hoods. Sure, they sometimes played the part, but their motivations were less about noble redistribution and more about staying one step ahead of starvation or the hangman. The reality? These guys were often desperate, sometimes violent, and always on the edge of survival. But hey, who doesn't love a good yarn about sticking it to the man, right? Enter Ned Kelly, the poster child for Aussie rebellion and, paradoxically, a man of Irish Catholic descent who was as much a product of his environment as he was a player in it. Born in 1854 in Beveridge, Victoria, Kelly grew up in a world where the British colonial system was about as forgiving as a dingo with a bone to pick. His father, a former convict, struggled under the weight of systemic discrimination, a narrative all too familiar to those of Irish descent in Australia at the time. So, what made Kelly different? His audacity, for starters. Kelly wasn't content to simply survive. He aimed to thrive, albeit on his own terms. By the time he reached his 20s, he'd graduated from petty thievery to full-scale bushranging, culminating in the infamous Kelly Gang's criminal exploits. But let's not romanticize this too quickly. Sure, the gang robbed banks and took hostages, but their actions were often brutal and their motives were as much about personal gain as any perceived social justice. Now, here's where things get spicy. Kelly and his gang, understanding the power of narrative, began crafting their own legend. In 1879, amidst their crime spree, they penned the Geraldary Letter, a 56-page manifesto of sorts, dictated by Kelly and meant to justify their actions. In it, Kelly painted himself as a victim of police persecution, railing against the injustices faced by his family and fellow Irish Australians. This wasn't just a criminal rant, it was a masterstroke in myth-making, casting Kelly as a folk hero in waiting. The media of the time ate it up like a possum at a fruit festival. Newspapers, aware that sensationalism sold copies faster than cold beer on a hot day, ran with the story. Kelly became the star of his own outlaw epic, a figure of fascination and fear. Ballads and poems celebrated his escapades, turning him into a larger-than-life character. This was the age before social media, folks, where a good story spread through word of mouth, print, and song faster than you could say, bush telegraph. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate the power of the press in the 19th century. It was a bit like today's clickbait, only with more ink and less Wi-Fi. Papers knew that a headline about a daring robbery or a dramatic shootout sold like hotcakes. The public, hungry for tales of adventure, gobbled it up, and bushrangers, for better or worse, became the rock stars of their day, albeit ones more likely to end up in a pine box than a penthouse. Yet, for all the romanticism, the reality of bushranging was anything but glamorous. Take the Kelly Gang's final stand in 1880 at Glenrowan, a showdown that has all the makings of a Hollywood blockbuster, complete with armor-clad outlaws in a fiery siege. But in truth, it was a desperate last gasp, an attempt to derail a train full of police that ended with the gang holed up in a hotel, surrounded and outgunned. That homemade armor, more a symbol of defiance than practicality, turned out to be as cumbersome as it was bulletproof. The gang's capture and Kelly's subsequent execution were a stark reminder that even legends have an expiration date. The aftermath of Kelly's execution proved that, while you can hang a man, you can't bury his myth. His last words, allegedly, "such is life," have been debated and romanticized, cementing his status as a cultural icon. But what does this tell us about the times? Well, it suggests a society grappling with its identity, where the underdog could become a hero and where rebellion against authority resonated with the disenfranchised masses. Yet, let's not gloss over the darker side. For all his bravado, Kelly's actions and those of his fellow bushrangers were often marked by violence and fear. The romantic image of bushrangers as noble rebels overlooks the harsh truth. They were outlaws operating outside the law, driven by necessity as much as any quest for justice. Their lives were a brutal testament to the realities of colonial life, where economic disparity and rigid social hierarchies left many with little choice but to take up arms against a system that seemed stacked against them from birth. And what of the law itself? The authorities weren't blind to the allure of the bushranger myth. They knew they were fighting more than just flesh and blood criminals. They were battling an idea. In their quest to maintain order, they often resorted to harsh measures, employing both force and propaganda to counter the bushranger narrative. Wanted posters, public executions, and even rewards for information were all part of their arsenal. Yet, for every outlaw they caught, another would rise, drawn by the promise of freedom and notoriety. As we continue to explore this wild chapter of history, keep in mind that the story of the bushranger is as much about the myths we create as the harsh realities we endure. It's a dance between the allure of rebellion and the grim truth of survival, a testament to the human spirit's capacity for both defiance and desperation. So, as you ponder the legacy of figures like Ned Kelly, remember that behind every legend lies a man, flawed and complex, shaped by the times and yet somehow transcending them. The tale of the bushranger is far from over, and as we dig deeper, the lines between myth and reality become ever more intriguing. The tale of bushrangers, tangled up in myth and reality, isn't just about the outlaws themselves. It's also about the formidable response of the colonial authorities, who weren't exactly thrilled with their land becoming the Wild West of the Southern Hemisphere. You see, the authorities had a bit of a PR problem on their hands. The bushrangers were becoming folk heroes, and the government had to step up their game to counter this romantic narrative. Enter the mounted police, the colonial answer to the chaos. Now, before you start picturing the Mounties from Canada, let's set the scene. The mounted police were established in 1825, long before Ned Kelly's armour-clad escapades, and they were designed to be a mobile force capable of pursuing bushrangers across the rugged Australian terrain. Think of them as the law on horseback, equipped not with modern technology, but with sheer tenacity and a good horse. And they needed it. The bush was no place for the faint-hearted, and these troopers had to be as tough as the outlaws they were chasing. The colonial government, realizing that brute force alone wouldn't cut it, also introduced legislative measures aimed at curbing the bushranger problem. In 1830, they passed the Bushranging Act, which granted police extensive powers, including the authority to arrest anyone who failed to prove their identity or provide a satisfactory account of themselves. It was a bit like a stop and search on steroids, designed to nip bushranging in the bud. The Act made it clear if you couldn't explain why you were wandering around the bush, you might find yourself in a bit of a pickle. But legislation wasn't the only strategy in play. The authorities were also keen on making a very public example of captured bushrangers. Public hangings were the grim spectacles of the day, intended to deter would-be outlaws with the promise of a rope and a drop if they got caught. Take the case of Martin Cash, a notorious bushranger who was eventually captured and sentenced to death. His execution was a public affair, meant to remind everyone that crime didn't pay, unless you were the hangman, of course. Yet, for all the legislative and judicial muscle, it was the manhunts that captured the public's imagination. These were epic pursuits, where mounted police would track bushrangers for days, weeks even, across some of the most inhospitable land on earth. Imagine trying to hunt a needle in a haystack, only this needle shoots back. It was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, played out against a backdrop of eucalyptus trees and red dust. One of the most significant turning points came in 1865 with the capture of Ben Hall's gang. Hall, once a cattle farmer turned bushranger after a series of personal and legal misfortunes, led a group that became infamous for their daring robberies. The colonial authorities, fed up with Hall's antics, launched an intense manhunt that ended in Hall's death and the arrest of his associates. This was a major victory for the mounted police, showcasing the effectiveness of a well-organized pursuit and sending a clear message to other would-be outlaws. But the authorities didn't stop there. They understood that to truly dismantle the bushranger mythos, they had to cut off the support networks that sustained them. This meant cracking down on the bush telegraphs, those secretive networks of informants and sympathizers. It was a bit like playing whack-a-mole, with the authorities trying to root out anyone who dared to aid the bushrangers. They encouraged communities to report suspicious activities and offered rewards for information leading to arrests, turning neighbour against neighbour in a bid to control the countryside. The decline of bushranging as a viable lifestyle was also due in part to the changing economic landscape. As the 19th century wore on, Australia's economy began to stabilise. The gold rushes had brought prosperity, if not equality, and land was becoming more accessible to those willing to work for it. Opportunities were opening up away from a life of crime, making the bushranger path less appealing. After all, why risk your neck robbing stagecoaches when you could try your luck in the mines or on a sheep station? Another factor was the improved infrastructure. By the late 1800s, railways were crisscrossing the continent, making it harder for bushrangers to operate in isolation. The iron horses brought not just people and goods, but also a sense of law and order, as the mounted police could now travel more swiftly than ever. The once remote outposts of civilization were becoming interconnected, leaving fewer places for bushrangers to hide. Yet, even as bushranging waned, the myths persisted. The public's appetite for tales of rebellion didn't fade, and the stories of daring outlaws continued to be retold in newspapers and ballads. The authorities might have won the physical battle, but the cultural war was another matter entirely. The romantic image of the bushranger as a rugged individualist, sticking it to the man in an unforgiving land, lingered on, long after the last outlaw had been captured or killed. So, while the mounted police and their legislative allies managed to rein in the bushranger problem, they couldn't quite extinguish the spark of rebellion that these figures represented. The bushrangers lived on in the collective memory as symbols of resistance, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, the human spirit could defy authority. As we move forward in this story, remember that the decline of bushranging wasn't just about law and order triumphing over chaos. It was also about a society coming to terms with its own identity, where the line between hero and villain was as blurred as the horizon on a hot Australian day. With the stage set for the final act of our bushranger saga, we'll leave you hanging like a good serial should, right on the edge, with more questions than answers and the promise of more revelations to come. Stay tuned as we delve into the legacy of these outlaws and the myths that refuse to die. As we dive into the legacy of bushrangers, let's unravel how these outlaws have been woven into the tapestry of Australian culture, both as legends and as cautionary tales. In the grand narrative of the land down under, bushrangers are more than just historical footnotes. They're complex symbols of defiance that have inspired a cultural fascination that refuses to fade. Now, let's talk about the cinematic landscape where bushrangers made their dramatic entrance. The silver screen has always had a soft spot for anti-heroes, and Aussie filmmakers are no exception. From the silent film era of the early 1900s to the gritty realism of modern cinema, bushrangers have been portrayed in every shade of moral ambiguity. Take the 1906 film The Story of the Kelly Gang, often credited as the world's first feature-length film. It was a sensation, running over an hour long, a marathon in those days, and further immortalising Ned Kelly as a folk hero. It's as if Australians couldn't resist the allure of a bloke in a tin helmet sticking it to the establishment. Books, too, have played their part in burnishing the bushranger myth. Rolf Boldrewood's Robbery Under Arms, published in serial form from 1882 to 1883, captured the public's imagination with its dramatic tales of bushranging life. And while Boldrewood's work was fiction, it was steeped in the gritty realities of the times, giving readers both the thrill of adventure and a glimpse into the harshness of colonial life. These stories continue to grip audiences, proving that the saga of the bushranger is as timeless as it is thrilling. But why are we so fascinated by these rogue figures? Perhaps it's the classic allure of the rebel. Bushrangers were the quintessential outsiders, thumbing their noses at authority and carving their own path in a society that often seems stacked against them. For a nation forged from convict roots, the bushranger embodies a spirit of resistance that resonates deeply with the Australian psyche. It's the same reason we love to root for the underdog in any story. There's something inherently appealing about the idea of standing up to the powers that be, even if it means living life on the edge. Yet, let's not gloss over the reality that these were not tales of unblemished heroism. The bushrangers, for all their daring and bravado, were often violent and ruthless, their actions driven by necessity as much as any sense of justice. They were products of their times when survival often meant breaking the law. It's this duality, the blend of heroism and villainy, that makes their stories so compelling and ripe for retelling. Now, you might be wondering, how do modern Australians view these historical figures? Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag. On the one hand, bushrangers are celebrated as cultural icons, with their stories told and retold in schools, museums, and tourist attractions. The town of Glenrowan, where Ned Kelly made his last stand, is a prime example. An entire industry built around the mythology of one man's rebellion. On the other hand, there's a recognition of the darker truths behind the legends, a growing awareness that the romanticized view of bushrangers as noble outlaws often overlooks the real suffering they caused. The legacy of bushrangers is also evident in the broader context of Australian identity. In a nation that prides itself on mateship and fair play, the bushranger represents a more rugged aspect of the national character, a willingness to defy authority and chart one's own course, come what may. It's a narrative that resonates in a country shaped by convict history, where the line between lawman and outlaw was often as thin as a dusty bush track. But what does this mean for our understanding of history? Well, it highlights the importance of looking beyond the myths to uncover the realities. The stories of bushrangers remind us that history is never black and white, but a tapestry of human experiences, each thread woven from the lives of real people facing real challenges. It's a reminder that the past is not just a collection of dates and events, but a living narrative that continues to shape our present and future. In the end, the tale of the bushranger is one of contradictions, a story of rebellion and survival, of myth and reality. It's a testament to the enduring allure of the outlaw, a figure both reviled and revered, whose legacy continues to captivate and confound. As we close this chapter of history, remember that the allure of the bushranger lies not just in their audacity or their defiance, but in their embodiment of the human spirit's relentless drive for freedom, even in the face of overwhelming odds. So, next time you find yourself engrossed in a tale of daring escapades and lawless adventures, take a moment to consider the real stories behind the legends. The bushrangers were more than just outlaws. They were a reflection of their times, a mirror held up to the society that created them. And in that reflection, we can see not just the past, but the enduring complexities of human nature, our capacity for both greatness and folly, for heroism and villainy. As we close the book on this tale, let's carry forward the lessons it teaches us about resilience, identity, and the never-ending quest for freedom in all its forms. The sun peeks over Baghdad's skyline, sending a warm glow across the city that's been called the heart of the Islamic Golden Age. Your eyes flutter open to the melodic call of the muezzin. It's not just a wake-up call, it's the opening act of a day in a city that thrives on knowledge, debate, and, let's be honest, a fair bit of caffeine. You roll out of bed and the cool morning air greets you like a refreshing splash of reality. First things first, it's time to heed the call to prayer. The streets are already buzzing with life, even at this early hour. People hustle to their daily duties, the echoes of 1,000 footsteps mingling with the distant clamour of market stalls setting up shop. Welcome to Baghdad, circa 175, where the day begins with faith and a side of brisk commerce. Now, let's talk breakfast. Forget your modern-day avocado toast here. You might start with a flatbread dipped in olive oil, perhaps flavoured with a sprinkle of za'atar. And, of course, there's coffee thick, dark, and not just a drink, but a brewing revolution in itself. While Europe is still trying to figure out how to make wine out of grapes, the Arab world is perfecting the art of turning beans into liquid gold. This isn't your coffee shop latte. It's the kind of coffee that slaps you awake and makes you ponder the universe. The beans, by the way, have travelled thousands of miles, from Yemen's Arabian Peninsula across trade routes that are lifelines to this sprawling metropolis. Speaking of trade routes, let's get one thing straight. Baghdad isn't just a tourist destination in a history book. It's the economic engine of the medieval world. Think of it as Wall Street meets Silicon Valley, with a dash of ancient wonder. Those trade routes you've heard about? They're not just dusty roads connecting lands, they're the arteries through which the lifeblood of commerce flows. Silks from China, spices from India, and the aforementioned coffee from Yemen all converge here, making Baghdad not just rich, but filthy rich. We're talking an economy that rivals the GDP of modern small countries. But let's not get too carried away with the romanticized notions of the Golden Age. Sure, it's an era of unprecedented learning and innovation, but it's also a time when living costs could pinch. Scholars like you live in a world where the price of a manuscript might cost as much as a horse. And let's not forget the taxes. Oh, the taxes. The city's treasury has its hands in every pocket, from the merchants hawking goods to the scholars penning philosophical treatises. You, as a scholar, navigate this landscape with a mix of curiosity and economic savvy. Your stipend might not cover a lavish lifestyle, but it ensures you can afford the essentials: books, ink, and maybe the occasional indulgence in a sweet treat from the bazaar. Speaking of which, the bazaar is where the real action is. It's a sensory overload of colours, sounds, and, let's face it, some pretty questionable smells. It's here that you'll find everything from the finest silks to the latest treatises hot off the scribe's desk. As you sip your morning coffee, let's debunk a myth or two. The Golden Age wasn't all glitter and glory. Sure, the House of Wisdom was like the Harvard of its day, but even scholars had to deal with budget cuts and bureaucratic red tape. Libraries weren't just ivory towers of enlightenment. They were battlegrounds of intellectual property, where the latest theories could make or break reputations. And then there's the gritty reality of daily life. The streets might be paved with knowledge, but they're also clogged with the usual urban issues. Sewage systems leave much to be desired, and the air is thick with the smoke of 1,000 cooking fires. While you're enjoying your breakfast, you might hear the distant clamour of camel caravans arriving with their loads of goods. Each caravan is a small miracle of logistics, a testament to human ingenuity and a reminder that the world is both vast and intimately connected. So here you are, standing on the threshold of another day in Baghdad. The sun is climbing higher, and the city is a living, breathing organism. It's a place where the past and present collide, where the myths of the Golden Age meet the harsh realities of medieval life. The day is yours to seize, filled with the promise of discovery, debate, and maybe a little bit of drama. Because in Baghdad, the city that never sleeps on its laurels, every day is a new chapter in the grand story of history. As you make your way through the bustling streets of Baghdad, you can't help but notice the city's pulse quickening with each step. The aroma of spices blends with the scent of ink, a fitting prelude to your destination, the illustrious House of Wisdom. Think of it as the brain of Baghdad, where the neurons are scholars and synapses are the debates that set the intellectual world on fire. Now, let's set the record straight. The House of Wisdom wasn't some utopian ivory tower where scholars floated on clouds of enlightenment. It was more like an academic battleground, where intellectual heavyweights came to throw down in pursuit of knowledge and sometimes egos. Picture a place where Aristotle and Euclid rubbed shoulders with Indian numerals and Persian poetry. Here, translation is an art form, debates are the lifeblood, and discoveries are the currency. Enter Al-Khwarizmi, the mathematical maestro who put the L in algebra. We're talking about the guy whose work on algorithms is why you can binge-watch your favorite shows without buffering. In the 9th century, he wrote the compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing, a title as dense as a loaf of stale bread but packed with revolutionary ideas. The House of Wisdom was his playground, where he and other scholars cracked open ancient texts like fortune cookies, revealing treasures of knowledge. Want proof of his lasting influence? Algorithm is derived from the Latinization of his name. Talk about branding. But let's not get carried away with the romantic notion of a scholarly paradise. The House of Wisdom was a beacon of learning, sure, but running the place was as complex as one of Al-Khwarizmi's equations. This wasn't a DIY library run by a few volunteers. It was a state-funded colossus, costing the Abbasid Caliphate a pretty penny. Maintaining this intellectual powerhouse required not just brain power, but serious economic muscle. We're talking salaries for translators, scribes, and scholars, funds for acquiring precious manuscripts, and, of course, the upkeep of the sprawling complex itself. In the 9th century, a single manuscript could set you back 10 dinars, a hefty sum when you consider that a skilled labourer might earn just 1 dinar a month. Feel the pinch yet? Scholars had to balance their intellectual pursuits with the practicalities of survival in a city where the price of paper could rival that of saffron. And then there's the political landscape, because nothing says academic enlightenment like a little bureaucratic red tape. The caliphs, those benevolent rulers who funded this intellectual carnival, weren't just patrons of the arts out of the goodness of their hearts. They had agendas. Knowledge was power, and controlling the flow of information could solidify their rule or spark dissent. Scholars had to navigate these treacherous waters with the finesse of a tightrope walker over a pit of political vipers. The House of Wisdom wasn't just a centre for learning, it was a hub of cultural exchange. Picture a bustling scene where Greek, Persian, and Indian scholars mingled, each bringing a piece of their homeland's intellectual puzzle to the table. The translation movement that swept through these halls wasn't just about converting words from one language to another, it was about transforming ideas. It was here that ancient Greek texts were reborn in Arabic, breathing new life into fields like astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. But let's bust another myth. While Baghdad was a melting pot of cultures and ideas, it wasn't free from the occasional clash. Scholars often found themselves embroiled in heated debates that could make today's academic feuds look like playground squabbles. These intellectual sparring matches were the medieval equivalent of social media flame wars, with reputations on the line and egos at stake. Within the House of Wisdom, knowledge wasn't just absorbed, it was challenged, dissected, and occasionally turned on its head. The very air seemed to crackle with the electricity of minds at work, yet the pursuit of wisdom was often shadowed by the spectre of censorship. While the caliphs supported the translation of foreign texts, they were equally vigilant about keeping subversive ideas in check. Let's not forget the economic undercurrents shaping all this intellectual ferment. The bustling trade routes that fed Baghdad's economy also fueled its scholarly endeavours. The city's wealth allowed it to attract the brightest minds from across the known world, but this influx of talent came with a price. Scholars had to justify their worth, producing work that not only advanced knowledge, but also demonstrated their patrons' prestige. So, as you stroll through the corridors of the House of Wisdom, take a moment to appreciate the complex tapestry of ambition, scholarship, and politics that wove this institution into the fabric of Baghdad. Here, amidst the scrolls and inkpots, the world was remade, one idea at a time. But don't be fooled by the romantic allure of the Golden Age. Beneath the gilded surface lay the gritty realities of economic constraints and political machinations. The sun climbs higher, casting its light into the alcoves where scholars hunch over their work, quills scratching out the future in elegant Arabic script. This is the real magic of the House of Wisdom, the alchemy that transforms ink and paper into the gold of human thought. And as you weave your way through its storied halls, remember, in Baghdad, the past and future are always in conversation, whispering secrets to those willing to listen. As you step out of the House of Wisdom, leaving behind the cerebral buzz of scholarly debate, you're greeted by a different kind of sensory overload. The bustling midday life of Baghdad. The sun hangs high, casting its relentless rays over a city that's both a marvel of human achievement and a testament to its messiness. Today, you're not just a scholar, you're a participant in the grand social experiment that is medieval Baghdad. Now, let's talk demographics. Baghdad in the 12th century is like a medieval United Nations, minus the air conditioning and diplomatic immunity. Imagine a city where over 1 million souls weave through the streets. Persians, Arabs, Turks, Kurds, Jews, Christians, and a smattering of others, all vying for space and survival in this urban tapestry. The sheer number of languages spoken here could make a polyglot's head spin. Arabic, Persian, Turkish, Hebrew, Syriac, Greek, and maybe a dash of Latin for good measure. It's a linguistic symphony, or cacophony depending on whom you ask, that reflects the city's role as a crossroads of culture and commerce. But let's not get too starry-eyed about this medieval melting pot. While it's true that Baghdad is a hub of cultural and intellectual exchange, it's also a city where social hierarchies loom large. At the top of the heap, you've got the caliphs and their courtiers, living in opulence that would make a modern oligarch blush. Below them are the merchants, who, thanks to those bustling trade routes, enjoy a lifestyle that's relatively cushy. Think silk robes and elaborate meals, but maybe not private jets. Then come the artisans, scholars and tradesmen, scraping together a living with a mix of skill and tenacity. And at the bottom, the labourers and the poor, eking out an existence in a world that's as unforgiving as it is fascinating. It's a city of stark contrasts, where the divide between wealth and poverty is as wide as the Tigris River. The romantic vision of a harmonious, egalitarian society? Let's just say it's more fairy tale than fact. Speaking of harsh realities, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the not-so-glamorous sanitation situation. Remember those romanticized visions of Baghdad as a glittering jewel of the Islamic world? Well, jewels can be rough around the edges, and Baghdad's are downright gritty. While the city boasts impressive architecture and advanced medical knowledge, it's also a place where waste management is more of an art than a science. The streets are alive with the aroma of open sewers and the less than delightful scent of humanity in close quarters. It's a reminder that even the most advanced societies have their, shall we say, earthy realities. But don't let that deter you from enjoying the vibrant social scene. As you navigate the bustling bazaar, you're enveloped by a riot of colours, sounds and smells. Vendors hawk their goods with the enthusiasm of a carnival barker, each stall a microcosm of the city's diverse economy. Here, you can find everything from the finest silks to the latest literary treatises, the air thick with the heady mix of spices and ambition. Let's take a moment to appreciate the economic engine that fuels this market madness. The trade routes that crisscross Asia and the Middle East funnel wealth into Baghdad at an astonishing rate. Goods from China, India and beyond flood the stalls, each transaction a testament to the city's strategic importance. But here's the catch: while the wealth is real, so too is its uneven distribution. The opulence of the bazaar is a facade that masks the underlying struggles of those who can barely afford a handful of dates. Now, let's talk about the cost of a typical meal, because even scholars need to eat. With your modest scholar's stipend, you might splurge on a simple yet satisfying dish of lentils and rice, perhaps accompanied by some freshly baked flatbread. If you're feeling indulgent, you might add a bit of meat. Though let's be honest, it's a luxury reserved for special occasions or particularly successful intellectual endeavours. In a city where a dinar can stretch or snap depending on your social standing, the price of sustenance is a daily reminder of the economic tightrope you're walking. As you weave through the market, dodging donkeys and determined merchants, you can't help but notice the social hierarchies playing out in real time. The wealthy glide through the chaos, their finery a visual statement of their status, while the less fortunate navigate the same space with a different set of priorities, namely survival. It's a dance as old as civilization itself, a delicate balance between aspiration and reality. But let's not romanticize this too much. The class distinctions are as rigid as the structures that house them. The idea of Baghdad as a harmonious utopia is more myth than reality, a narrative that glosses over the tensions simmering beneath the surface. While the city is a beacon of learning and culture, it's also a place where power dynamics shape every interaction, where the promise of upward mobility can often feel like a mirage in the desert. As the sun begins its slow descent, casting a golden hue over the city, you reflect on the complex tapestry that is Baghdad. It's a place where the past and present coexist in a delicate dance, where the myths of the Golden Age are continually challenged by the gritty reality of medieval life. Here, in the heart of the Islamic world, you're not just a scholar or a spectator, you're a part of the grand narrative that unfolds with each passing day. So, as you make your way back to your scholarly pursuits, remember that Baghdad is a city of contradictions, a place where the pursuit of knowledge is both a privilege and a precarious endeavour, where the promise of enlightenment is tempered by the harsh realities of urban life. In this vibrant, chaotic metropolis, the stories of history are etched into every street corner, waiting to be discovered by those willing to look beyond the surface. As you navigate the bustling streets back to your scholarly quarters, the city hums with the complexities of its layered existence. Baghdad, in all its chaotic splendour, is not just a melting pot of cultures and ideas. It's also the epicenter of political manoeuvring that would make even the most seasoned diplomat break a sweat. Welcome to the afternoon segment of our Day in the Life, where we'll lift the veil on the intricate web of power dynamics that defined the 12th century Islamic world. First up, let's tackle the notion of a unified Islamic empire. Spoiler alert, it's as much a romanticized myth as anything else from this era. The Abbasid Caliphate, while impressive on paper, was more like a patchwork quilt stitched together with ambition, and held in place with a mix of diplomacy and military might. The Caliph in Baghdad might have been the nominal head honcho, but the reality was a bit like trying to herd cats. Local rulers, or emirs, wielded significant power in their territories, often acting with as much autonomy as a teenager with a new driver's license. Take, for example, the Seljuks, a dynasty of Turkic origin who were ostensibly the Caliphate's loyal enforcers, but in reality held the real power, especially after the infamous Battle of Dandanakan in 1040. They conquered much of the Middle East, creating a power base that even the Abbasid caliphs had to acknowledge. By the mid-12th century, the Seljuk sultans were the de facto rulers, with the caliphs reduced to more of a ceremonial role, a bit like the Queen of England before Brexit made things interesting again. Now, where do scholars fit into this tangled hierarchy? It's a bit of a tightrope walk. On one hand, scholars were revered for their knowledge and often served as advisors to the rulers. On the other, they were pawns in a high-stakes game of political chess. If a scholar fell foul of the current regime or a rival faction, they could find themselves out of favor, or worse, out of a job. Think of the famous philosopher, Avicenna, Ibn Sina, who, despite his groundbreaking work in medicine and philosophy, spent time on the run due to his political entanglements. His life was a roller coaster of patronage and persecution, a testament to the precarious nature of intellectual life in a politically volatile environment. And speaking of volatility, let's not forget the role of the military. While scholars penned treatises and debated the finer points of philosophy, the military was the steel backbone that held the empire together, or tore it apart. Armies were as much a political tool as they were a means of defense. The caliphs and their local rulers relied on their generals not just to fend off invasions, but to maintain internal order. The military's loyalty was often bought with land grants and political favors, and generals who were too successful risked becoming threats themselves. The economic implications of political decisions were as far-reaching as they were immediate. Each political shift could change trade routes or alter the flow of taxes, affecting everything from market prices to the availability of goods. Consider the shifting alliances and rivalries that turned trade routes into battlegrounds. A caravan that once travelled safely from Baghdad to Damascus might find itself rerouted, or worse, raided, if a local emir decided to flex their muscles. The city's economic lifeline was as fragile as a spider's web, with each strand vulnerable to the whims of those in power. And while we're on the topic of economy, let's not romanticize the idea of a golden age where everyone lived in scholarly paradise. The Abbasid Caliphate was a bureaucratic behemoth, and it demanded tribute from its territories like a tax collector on steroids. This wasn't just about keeping the lights on in the House of Wisdom. It was about maintaining an elaborate governmental apparatus that rivaled anything Rome had ever built. The economic burden fell heavily on the shoulders of the peasantry, the merchants, and yes, even the scholars, who had to navigate this financial labyrinth with all the cunning of a medieval accountant. In this political cauldron, intrigue was the seasoning that spiced up the soup. Intrigue was everywhere, from the caliph's court, where eunuchs and courtiers whispered in the shadows, to the streets where merchants traded not just in goods, but in information. Espionage was a fact of life, and knowing the right piece of gossip could be more valuable than gold. The scholar Al-Farabi, known as the second teacher after Aristotle, was rumoured to have had a knack for navigating these treacherous waters, lending his wisdom to those who could afford his counsel. So, as you settle into the rhythm of the afternoon, surrounded by the hum of political and economic machinations, remember this. Baghdad wasn't just a city of knowledge and culture. It was a living, breathing testament to the complexity of human ambition. The myths of a unified empire and a seamless golden age are just that, myths wrapped in the allure of nostalgia. The reality was a kaleidoscope of shifting allegiances, economic pressures, and political intrigue that make even modern politics look straightforward. As the sun begins its descent, casting long shadows across the city, you're left with the realization that Baghdad, in all its grandeur and grit, was a stage where power, knowledge, and ambition played out in equal measure. The city was a crucible of ideas and ideals, shaped as much by its political landscape as by the scholars who called it home. In the heart of the Islamic world, every decision, every alliance, and every scholarly debate resonated far beyond the city limits, echoing through the corridors of history. As you prepare for the evening ahead, the stories of Baghdad continue to unfold, promising yet more layers in the grand tapestry of its existence. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a golden glow over Baghdad's skyline, you're left with a sensation that's almost as rich as the city's history itself. The city, in all its multifaceted glory, has been a stage for the grand opera of human ambition, knowledge, and survival. But let's not wax poetic just yet. We've got some legacy to unpack. Picture this. It's the 12th century, and Baghdad is the intellectual powerhouse of the world. scholars here aren't just collecting dusty tomes for their own amusement. They're producing groundbreaking works that will, quite literally, change the course of history. Take the astrolabe, for instance. While Europe was still trying to figure out which way was north, Arab scholars were mastering the stars with this ancient GPS. The device wasn't just a nifty gadget for sailors. It was a symbol of the era's intellectual prowess and a testament to the Arab world's astronomical genius. Now, let's talk numbers. Not just any numbers, but the ones that make your head hurt, Arabic numerals. Yeah, those digits you use every day? You have Arab scholars to thank for that, or rather, for perfecting and spreading them. This numerical system, borrowed and refined from Indian mathematicians, was revolutionary. It made calculations easier, which in turn made commerce and science more accessible. Try doing your taxes in Roman numerals, and you'll understand why this was a game changer. But it wasn't just about gadgets and numbers. Baghdad scholars were the custodians of classical knowledge, translating Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic, thereby preserving them for future generations. Euclid, Galen, Ptolemy. These guys were household names in the House of Wisdom, not just because they were trendy, but because they offered insights that transcended time and geography. When the Renaissance rolled around centuries later, it was these translations that lit the intellectual fuse in Europe. The irony? While Europe's dark ages cast a long shadow, Baghdad scholars were busy shining a light brighter than a supernova. Speaking of light, let's debunk a bit of darkness surrounding the fall of Baghdad. Fast forward to 1258, when the Mongols, led by Hulagu Khan, stormed the city. The romanticized version paints it as the end of a golden era, a tragic fall from grace. While it's true that the libraries were looted and the Tigris ran black with ink, the decline had started long before. Economic strain, political fragmentation, and power struggles had already sown the seeds of decay. The Mongols were the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, or in this case, the city's defences. And let's not forget the Crusades, those wonderfully romanticized adventures of knights and chivalry. They were part of the geopolitical chess game that stressed the region further. The Crusaders didn't make it to Baghdad, but their presence in the region disrupted trade routes and alliances, adding another layer of complexity to an already intricate tapestry. So, what's the takeaway? The legacy of Baghdad's scholars is a blend of romance and reality, much like the city itself. The romance is in their achievements, pioneers in fields like optics, medicine, and philosophy. The reality is in their struggle, navigating political intrigue, economic pressures, and the ever-looming shadow of empire. Their work didn't just echo through the walls of the House of Wisdom. It reverberated across continents and centuries, influencing everything from navigation to numeracy. As you reflect on the day, walking through the now dimly lit streets, you realize that history is never black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of color, a swirling mix of human achievement and folly, of high ideals and harsh realities. Baghdad, in its heyday, was a microcosm of this complexity, a city of contradictions that managed to be both a beacon of learning and a battleground for power. In the end, the legacy of Baghdad scholars is as enduring as the myths that surround them. Their contributions laid the groundwork for future advances, reminding us that knowledge, once shared, knows no bounds. As the city fades into the night, you carry with you the understanding that history is a dialogue between past and present, a conversation that continues to evolve with each new discovery and each retelling. And in that dialogue, Baghdad will always have a voice, whispering through the annals of time, inviting us to listen and learn. The sun edges over the horizon, painting the sky with the kind of colors that make poets sigh and artists reach for their brushes. You shuffle out of bed, feeling the cool tile beneath your feet as you prepare to embark on yet another day in 16th century Isfahan. This city, dear listener, isn't just the capital of the Safavid Empire. It's the intellectual hub of the region, a place where trade routes and the quest for knowledge cross paths like lovers in a crowded bazaar. As you step outside, the city is already coming alive with its particular brand of organized chaos. Merchants are setting up shop, their stalls bursting with everything from silk to spices. The air is thick with the scent of saffron, mingling with the earthy odor of fresh bread baking in clay ovens. You dodge a donkey cart making its way down the narrow street, its driver shouting warnings that are more colourful than the textiles he's transporting. Now, let's talk about Isfahan's role as a scholarly paradise. This isn't just some glorified university town. It's a place where ideas and commerce collide in spectacular fashion. At its peak, Isfahan had a population of around 500,000 people. That's huge for the 16th century. We're talking a city that could rival any of its European contemporaries in terms of size and influence. And it's not just about the numbers, it's about the vibe. The Safavid rulers, especially Abbas I, pumped resources into the city like it was a Renaissance Kickstarter project, transforming it into an urban marvel with stunning mosques, grand squares, and lush gardens. But you're not here for the scenery. Well, not just for that. As a Persian scholar, you're headed to the madrasas, those centres of learning that are as much about intellectual exchange as they are about architectural splendour. These schools aren't just thrown together with mud and hope. They're constructed with precision, showcasing the empire's wealth and priorities. Take the Chaharbagh school, for instance. Built under Shah Sultan Hussein in the early 18th century, it features intricate tile work and an expansive courtyard that could serve as a setting for the most epic of philosophical debates. Walking through the streets, you can't help but notice how the architecture reflects the empire's priorities. The buildings are designed with an eye toward grandeur and functionality. They're big, bold, and built to last. The masons didn't just slap some bricks together and call it a day. No, they crafted spaces that inspire awe and contemplation, with domes that seem to touch the sky and halls that echo with the voices of scholars past and present. Isfahan's economy plays a crucial role in all this scholarly activity. The trade routes crisscrossing through the city bring in goods and ideas from as far away as China and Europe. The city is an intellectual melting pot, and its bazaars are the heartbeat of this thriving metropolis. They say you can measure the wealth of a city by its markets, and Isfahan is no slouch. Silk, precious stones, exotic spices. If it's valuable, you'll find it here. And the money flowing through these markets? It's what keeps the madrasas in business, funding both the scholars and their sometimes extravagant lifestyles. After all, nothing fuels debate like a good feast. But don't be fooled into thinking it's all scholarly debates and academic pursuits. The social structure here is as complex as a Persian carpet. Scholars have a certain status, sure, but they're not the top dogs. The political elite and the merchant class wield considerable influence, shaping the city's policies and priorities. The Shah himself is a patron of the arts and sciences, but also a shrewd ruler who understands the power of knowledge as both a tool and a weapon. It's a delicate balance, and one that requires a scholar to be as politically savvy as they are intellectually curious. As you near the madrasa, you're greeted by the sight of its grand entrance, a gateway to a world where ideas are the real currency. You pause for a moment, taking in the intricate tile work that tells stories of history and myth. The colours, deep blues, vibrant greens, and shimmering golds, reflect the morning sun, casting patterns that seem almost alive. It's a reminder that while Isfahan may be a city of trade and power, it's also a place where beauty and knowledge are cherished above all. And so, with the promise of intellectual discovery ahead, you step into the madrasa, ready to engage in the kind of debates that can change the world, or at least your corner of it. Because in Isfahan, the pursuit of knowledge isn't just an academic exercise, it's a way of life. Stepping into the madrasa, you're immediately enveloped in a world where silence is golden, and the only thing louder than a whisper is the scratching of quills on paper. Welcome to your scholarly sanctuary, an intellectual beehive where the buzz is all about books, study, and the occasional heated debate over whether Aristotle or Plato had it right. The library is the heart of this academic realm, filled with scrolls and manuscripts that are as delicate as they are priceless. But before you get too lost in the romance of being surrounded by ancient wisdom, let's get real about what it actually means to be a scholar in the 16th century. First stop, your morning routine. Forget about a double-shot espresso or a quick scroll through Instagram. Your day kicks off with a deep dive into the texts that fuel your intellectual fires. The first order of business? Getting your hands on the materials you need. We're talking ink made from soot and gum arabic, paper so precious it might as well be spun from gold, and books that, quite literally, cost a fortune. Books in Isfahan aren't just casually picked off a shelf like at your local library. Oh no, acquiring a book is more like winning a lottery where the currency is your life savings. We're talking about a single manuscript costing anywhere from a few dinars to several gold coins, depending on its rarity and the intricacy of its illumination. And illumination isn't just a fancy way to say decorated. It's an art form involving gold leaf and vibrant pigments that make the pages glow like a medieval disco. But even if you manage to scrape together the funds, knowledge isn't infinite. You can't just pop online and download the complete works of Avicenna. Instead, you're often stuck with whatever the local scribe has managed to painstakingly copy by hand, and let's not even start on the potential for errors. An extra dot here, or a missing line there, and suddenly you're reading about a philosophy that only exists in the mind of an exhausted scribe who needed a nap. Now, let's talk about ink, because your quill isn't going to write itself. The ink you use is a concoction that would make a chemist proud or horrified. Made from soot mixed with gum arabic and water, it's a recipe older than your great-great-grandfather's beard. The soot, often collected from burning oil lamps, gives it that rich black color. But it's a delicate balance. Too much water, and your script bleeds across the page like an emotional letter from a jilted lover. Not enough, and it clumps like porridge gone wrong. And paper, sweet, sweet paper. In 16th century Isfahan, paper is a luxury item. Most of it is imported from places like Samarkand, famed for its fine quality. A single sheet might set you back the equivalent of a modern-day latte, which doesn't sound like much until you realize your entire stipend is less than what some people spend on spices. So you write carefully, because every mistake is literal money down the drain. You see, the romantic notion of a scholar endlessly consuming knowledge is just that, a notion. The reality is, you're often limited by what's available and what you can afford. It's not just a matter of intellectual curiosity, but also financial savvy. Your pursuit of knowledge is bound by the tight leather straps of economic reality. You learn to be selective, to choose your battles of intellect wisely, because each book, each scroll is an investment. The financial constraints don't just stop at materials. They've got a way of influencing what you actually choose to study. Sure, delving into the metaphysical musings of ancient philosophers is all well and good, but practical knowledge, like medicine or astronomy, is often more lucrative. These fields attract patrons, wealthy merchants or even members of the court, who are willing to support scholars that can improve their fortunes or forecast their fates. You quickly learn that the line between scholarly pursuit and economic necessity is as thin as the paper you're writing on. So there you are, ink-stained fingers poised over a scroll, ready to absorb whatever nuggets of wisdom you can find. It's a world where the pursuit of knowledge is a blend of passion and pragmatism, where every page turned is a small act of defiance against ignorance. And yet, amidst these practical constraints, there's an undeniable beauty to it all. A testament to the lengths humans will go to understand their world, even when every quill stroke drains their coffers and tests their patience. For now, you settle into your studies, the morning sun filtering through the stained glass windows, casting a kaleidoscope of colors onto the pages before you. Because in Isfahan, even the most mundane of scholarly tasks are performed under the watchful gaze of beauty, a constant reminder of the empire's legacy of art, knowledge, and ambition. And as your quill dances across the page, leaving trails of black ink on the white canvas, you are part of that legacy, one careful word at a time. As your quill takes a well-deserved rest, the rumble in your stomach signals it's time to shift gears from the cerebral to the culinary. You exit the madrasa, leaving behind the quiet hum of scholarly toil for the vibrant chaos of Isfahan's lunchtime bustle. Now, dear listener, prepare to take your taste buds on a journey through the spice-laden streets of 16th century Persia, where every meal is a small epic of flavor and tradition. First stop, the spice market, an olfactory assault that could resurrect the dead. We're talking saffron so red it makes rubies envious, cinnamon sticks longer than your arm, and cardamom pods that could double as maracas. The air is a heady mix of aromas that could inspire both poetry and ravenous hunger. You see, Isfahan wasn't just a crossroads for scholars, it was a culinary intersection where East met West in a fragrant embrace. The city spice markets were the heart of an economic engine that ran on the promise of exotic flavors. Spices, in the 16th century, were more than just kitchen staples. They were the Bitcoin of their day, volatile, valuable, and capable of making or breaking fortunes. A pound of saffron could fetch as much as a skilled craftsman's monthly wage. It was a luxury, yes, but not just for the elite. Even scholars, with their modest stipends, would occasionally indulge in these aromatic wonders, because who can resist the allure of saffron-infused rice? But let's not get carried away by the idea of endless tables groaning under the weight of opulent feasts. The reality, as always, is a little less glamorous. While the Persian Empire was renowned for its lavish banquets, dinner parties that would make even the most extravagant Instagram influencer blush, your average scholar wasn't exactly bathing in saffron and rosewater. Most meals were simple, consisting of bread, rice, and whatever vegetables were in season. Meat was a rare treat, often reserved for special occasions or when a patron was feeling particularly generous. Yet, the simplicity of these meals doesn't diminish their significance. Food in Isfahan was as much about social connection as it was about sustenance. Lunchtime could be an intellectual affair, a chance to debate the finer points of philosophy over a steaming bowl of ash rishta, a Persian noodle soup that's as comforting as it is complex. Conversations over meals were the original social media, minus the trolls, but with plenty of spirited discussion. And let's not forget the economic symphony that played out with every meal. The trade routes that snaked through Isfahan like veins brought more than just spices. They delivered rice from India, sugar from the Arabian Peninsula, and dates from Mesopotamia. Each ingredient was a testament to the empire's reach and the intricate web of commerce that sustained it. These trade routes weren't just lines on a map, they were the lifelines of Isfahan, connecting it to a world of flavors and ideas. Now, it wouldn't be a true exploration of Persian dining without debunking a myth or two. The image of Persian opulence is a seductive one. Think silk-draped banquets with enough food to feed a small army, but it's a bit of a mirage when it comes to the daily grind. Sure, the court feasts were legendary, but for most, dining was a more pragmatic affair. Scholars often shared meals, both to stretch their limited resources and to enjoy the camaraderie of their peers. It was less about excess and more about community. As you wander through the marketplace, perhaps picking up a few spices for your own modest feast, consider the layers of history wrapped up in each purchase. The saffron in your hand isn't just a spice, it's a story, a tale of farmers in distant lands, merchants who risked life and limb on perilous journeys, and the relentless march of trade that brought it all to your table. Finally, it's time to sit down and enjoy your meal, perhaps in the company of fellow scholars. The setting is modest, a simple wooden table under the shade of a leafy courtyard. The food is humble but satisfying. Fresh flatbread, a dish of fragrant rice, and a side of yogurt with cucumbers. As you eat, the conversation flows as freely as the stream nearby, touching on topics as varied as the philosophies of Avicenna to the latest astronomical observations. And there, in the gentle hum of scholarly discourse, the true magic of Isfahan reveals itself. It's not just the flavors on your plate or the spice in your dish. It's the shared experience, the exchange of ideas, the way food becomes a bridge between people and cultures. It's a reminder that in a world obsessed with opulence, sometimes the simplest meals are the most nourishing, both for the body and the soul. As you finish your meal, the sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows across the city. You're not just sated with food, but enriched by the experience, ready to dive back into the world of texts and tomes with renewed vigor. After all, in Isfahan, every meal is a prelude to the next great intellectual adventure, a chance to feed both the mind and the spirit in equal measure. And so, with the taste of saffron still lingering on your palate, you prepare to return to your studies, knowing that in this city of contrasts, each day offers a tantalizing blend of past and present, reality and myth, all waiting to be savored. Because here in Isfahan, every bite is a bite of history, every conversation a thread in the rich tapestry of human knowledge. And for a scholar, there is no greater feast. With your hunger sated and your mind buzzing with the morning's insights, it's time to dive back into the intellectual fray. The sun hangs high in the sky, casting its golden hue over Isfahan's bustling streets. You've got an afternoon of political and philosophical discourse ahead, an intricate dance of ideas where one misstep could land you in the kind of trouble that even the finest Persian carpets can't cushion. First up, let's talk politics, because in 16th century Persia, the The political scene is as lively as a bazaar on payday. The Safavid court isn't just a place of grand architecture and opulent banquets. It's a nexus of power where scholars like you must tread carefully. You see, the Safavid rulers were no slouches when it came to using knowledge as a tool of governance. They understood that ideas could be more influential than swords, and scholars were the craftsmen of those ideas. Now, here's where it gets tricky. The Safavid Empire, especially under Shah Abbas I, was a force to be reckoned with. He wasn't just a ruler. He was a master strategist who played the political game like a seasoned chess player. Abbas wasn't about to let intellectual freedom run rampant if it threatened his hold on the empire, so while scholars were valued for their wisdom, they also had to navigate a minefield of courtly politics where one wrong word could see them out of favour faster than you can say royal decree. Imagine this. You're in a discussion about the latest astronomical findings. It's all going well until someone brings up astrology, one of the Shah's favourite pastimes. Now, if you're smart, you'll tread lightly. Disagree too vehemently, and you might find yourself on the wrong side of royal opinion, which is a dangerous place to be when the Shah has a penchant for decisive action. You see, while the court was a place of learning, it was also a place of surveillance. The Shah had eyes and ears everywhere, and scholars had to be as adept at reading the political winds as they were at deciphering ancient texts. It's a delicate balance, like trying to write with ink that's both too watery and too thick. One miscalculation, and the whole thing smudges. Historical records like those from the Persian historian Hassan-e-Rumlu illustrate this tension beautifully. He recounts how scholars were often caught between their pursuit of truth and the demands of political loyalty. Hassan-e-Rumlu himself navigated these waters, recording events with a careful eye on how they might be received by those in power. These stories aren't just academic footnotes. They're cautionary tales for any scholar daring enough to challenge the status quo. Now, let's not romanticize this tightrope walk. It wasn't all intellectual heroism and daring debates. More often than not, scholars had to engage in a bit of strategic self-censorship. You didn't just blurt out your latest theory on governance without considering how it might align with the Shah's policies. In a way, it was like playing a game of historical charades, where the stakes were your reputation, your career, and sometimes your very life. Take, for example, the philosopher Mir Damad, a towering figure in Persian intellectual history. He was a master of balancing his philosophical pursuits with the demands of the court. His work on the nature of time and existence was groundbreaking, yet he always ensured it didn't ruffle royal feathers. Mir Damad understood that in the Safavid court discretion was the better part of valour, and sometimes the only part that kept you employed. But let's not forget the allure of this intellectual high-wire act. The court was a place where ideas could flourish, where debates could spark revolutions in thought. The Safavid rulers might have been cautious, but they were also patrons of the arts and sciences, eager to showcase their empire as a beacon of cultural and intellectual achievement. It was this delicate dance between control and creativity that made Isfahan a hub of innovation during the 16th century. Yet, this vibrant intellectual life came with its own set of risks. When scholars pushed too hard against the boundaries of accepted thought, they risked more than just a stern talking to. They risked losing their positions, their livelihoods, and in some cases, their freedom. The line between scholar and dissenter was as thin as a parchment, and crossing it could lead to a fall from grace that was as swift as it was final. So why did they do it? Why risk everything for the sake of ideas? Because for these scholars, the pursuit of knowledge was more than just a career. It was a calling. It was a chance to contribute to the great tapestry of human understanding, to leave a mark that would endure long after the Shah's decrees had faded into history. And in a world where knowledge was both a commodity and a weapon, that was a legacy worth any risk. As the afternoon shadows lengthen, you find yourself in the midst of one of these philosophical discussions, the air thick with the scent of ink and parchment. Around you, fellow scholars debate the merits of various philosophical schools, juggling ideas with the kind of dexterity that would put court jesters to shame. It's a heady mix of intellect and intrigue, where every word is weighed, every argument measured. And here's where the true magic of Isfahan reveals itself. It's a place where ideas are born, where the past and present coalesce into something greater than the sum of its parts. The scholarly debates of the day are more than academic exercises. They're the lifeblood of an empire that thrived on innovation and discovery. And for a scholar in 16th century Persia, there's no greater honor than to be part of that grand tradition. As the discussions wind down and the day draws to a close, you step out into the cool evening air, your mind alight with new ideas and possibilities. You've navigated the complex interplay of politics and philosophy, balancing the demands of the court with the pursuit of intellectual freedom. It's a dance as intricate as the tile work that adorns Isfahan's famous mosques, a testament to the enduring power of human curiosity. But don't get too comfortable. The Safavid Empire is a place where change is the only constant, where today's intellectual triumphs could be tomorrow's forgotten footnotes. As you make your way home, the city hums with the promise of another day, another chance to explore the rich tapestry of knowledge that defines this extraordinary place. So, as you lay your head to rest, remember that in Isfahan, every day is a new chapter in the ongoing saga of human discovery. Each moment is a chance to challenge the limits of understanding and push the boundaries of what it means to be a scholar. And while the risks are real, so too are the rewards. A legacy of learning that will echo through the ages, long after the scholars and rulers have passed into the annals of history. As the city of Isfahan wraps itself in the soft embrace of twilight, you make your way through its bustling streets, the hum of the day's activity gradually giving way to the quieter rhythms of evening. The air is cooler now, a welcome relief from the day's relentless sun, and the call to prayer echoes through the winding alleys, a sonorous reminder of the spiritual underpinnings that define life in the 16th century Persian metropolis. Evening prayers, a ritual as ingrained in the fabric of daily life as the intricate patterns woven into a Persian rug. You head to the mosque, a place not just of worship but of community, where the day's intellectual pursuits find a momentary pause in the solace of spiritual reflection. Now, don't be fooled by the serene image of a scholar lost in divine thought. Yes, prayer is a time for introspection, but it's also a time for connecting with others, a chance to engage in the social dance that frames your scholarly existence. Mosques during the Safavid era were more than mere places of worship. They were vibrant centers of social life, where people gathered not just to pray, but to share news, exchange ideas, and negotiate the social contracts that kept the city ticking. The grand mosques of Isfahan, like the Shah Mosque with its towering minarets and stunning tile work, were architectural marvels that stood as testaments to the empire's wealth and piety. And here's a fun fact. The Shah Mosque, completed in 1629, was built with an acoustic design so precise that a speaker's voice could be heard clearly across the main hall, a feature that came in handy during sermons and scholarly lectures alike. Talk about a 16th century PA system. But let's not romanticize the life of a scholar as one long, uninterrupted meditation on the divine. The reality is a bit more grounded. You see, scholars in Isfahan were deeply integrated into the social and religious fabric of the city. The myth of the detached ivory tower intellectual is just that, a myth. In truth, scholars were as much a part of the community as the merchants and artisans who filled the bustling bazaars. Yes, prayer was a time for personal reflection, but it was also a time to navigate the complex web of social relationships that defined your place in the world. It was a reminder that, no matter how lofty your intellectual pursuits, you were still part of a larger whole, a community bound together by shared beliefs and mutual dependencies. After the final Amen echoes through the mosque, you find yourself caught up in the gentle tide of people leaving the prayer hall. The conversation flows around you, a tapestry of voices discussing everything from the latest court gossip to the price of silk. It's a reminder that, in Isfahan, social and intellectual life are inextricably linked, each feeding into and sustaining the other. Now, let's tackle another myth while we're at it, the notion that scholars were somehow above the fray, untouched by the practicalities of everyday life. In reality, scholars were just as bound by economic and social constraints as anyone else. Their work was often funded by patrons who expected results, whether that meant new medical discoveries, astrological predictions, or philosophical insights that aligned with the current political climate. The famed philosopher and theologian Mullah Sadra knew this all too well. While he spent much of his life pursuing metaphysical questions that would give even the most ardent philosopher a headache, He also understood the importance of maintaining connections with influential patrons. His survival, like that of many scholars, depended not just on his intellectual prowess, but on his ability to navigate the shifting sands of favour and fortune. As you stroll through the cooling streets, the day's discussions and debates replay in your mind, each idea a piece in the intricate puzzle of understanding. Isfahan, with its vibrant mix of cultures and ideas, offers a unique perspective on the world, a lens through which the great questions of existence take on a new and vibrant hue. The day's learning feels like a tapestry, each thread of knowledge interwoven with the next, creating a picture that is both personal and universal. It's a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge isn't just an individual endeavour, it's a collective journey, one that binds you to your fellow scholars and to the generations of thinkers who have come before. And as the city settles into the quiet embrace of night, you find yourself reflecting on the legacy you'll leave behind. Because in the end, what is a scholar's life but a series of questions, each one leading to the next, each one a step on the path of discovery? It's a journey that requires not just intellect but courage, a willingness to ask the questions that others might shy away from, and to seek answers in a world filled with uncertainty. But here's the real kicker. For all the intellectual rigour and philosophical exploration, the life of a scholar in 16th century Isfahan is as much about the heart as it is about the mind. It's about the connections you forge, the community you build, and the legacy you leave behind. Because in a world where knowledge is both a commodity and a gift, the true measure of a scholar is not just in the books they write, but in the lives they touch. As you make your way home, the streets of Isfahan are quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. You pause for a moment, taking in the city that has been both your classroom and your canvas, a place where ideas are born and dreams are realized. It's a reminder that in the grand tapestry of life, each of us is but a single thread, woven together with countless others to create something beautiful and enduring. And so, with the day's lessons tucked away in the recesses of your mind, you turn the key in the lock and step into the quiet solitude of your home. The world outside may be filled with noise and distraction, but here, in the silence, you find the space to reflect, to dream, and to prepare for the challenges of tomorrow. Because in Isfahan, the pursuit of knowledge is not just a task, it's a calling, a lifelong journey that shapes not only who you are, but who you will become. And as the stars twinkle overhead, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the smallness of our place within it, you know that the journey is far from over. In the heart of this ancient city, where the past and present are woven together in a rich tapestry of culture and history, you find your place as a scholar, a seeker of truth, a keeper of knowledge, and a part of the grand story of human discovery. And there, under the watchful gaze of the stars, you drift into sleep, your mind filled with the promise of another day's journey, another step along the path of wisdom and understanding. Because in Isfahan, every day is a new chapter, a new opportunity to explore the mysteries of the world and to leave your mark on the ever-unfolding story of human knowledge. And for a scholar, there is no greater legacy than that. Zheng Guanying was born in 1842, right smack in the middle of the Qing dynasty, a time when China was having a bit of an identity crisis. Picture a country trying to juggle opium wars with awkward attempts at modernization. Zheng came into the world in Guangdong, a bustling hub of commerce and culture, where the clatter of merchants haggling was as common as the sound of cicadas in summer. His early years were spent in a merchant family, a set-up as typical as chopsticks at dinner, but one that would shape his future in unpredictable ways. Now, if you've ever tried to blend oil and water, you might get a sense of young Zheng's life. On one hand, he was steeped in Confucian values, the kind that preached filial piety and moral integrity as life's highest callings. On the other, he was smack dab in the middle of a rapidly globalizing world, where Western ships brought not only goods, but ideas that challenged the very essence of Chinese tradition. It was like trying to keep a foot in two boats drifting apart. Zheng's family was in the silk business, a trade that was as lucrative as it was competitive. Silk was the Qing dynasty's version of Bitcoin. Everyone wanted in, and fortunes were made and lost faster than you could say loom. Young Zheng cut his teeth on this hustle, learning the ropes of trade and the art of negotiation. But let's be honest, a teenage merchant is as prone to blunders as a cat is to curiosity. One of Zheng's early business ventures was exporting silk to foreign merchants who often viewed Chinese goods with the kind of reverence usually reserved for fine wine. But here's the kicker. Zheng, in his youthful enthusiasm, once mistook a batch of silk for high quality when it was, in fact, more like the textile equivalent of a soggy noodle. The merchants, not exactly known for their patience, demanded compensation faster than a dragon chasing its tail. Lesson learned, always check your inventory before sealing the deal. Despite such missteps, Zheng was a quick study. He noticed something curious. The Western merchants had a knack for turning a profit, even in a market as fickle as silk. They had this thing called capitalism, a system where making money was not just a necessity but an art form. To Zheng, this was a revelation. If Confucianism was the steady, reliable ox cart, capitalism was the shiny new steam engine, promising faster journeys and faraway destinations. But how do you reconcile the two? Confucian scholars would furrow their brows at the idea of wealth accumulation. For individual gain, after all, virtue was supposed to be its own reward. Yet, Zheng saw the potential of marrying these seemingly contradictory ideas. Why not use Western economic principles to bolster China's traditional values and, in turn, elevate the nation's standing in the world? It was an idea as radical as putting soy sauce on spaghetti, unheard of, yet tantalizing. Zheng's early experiences in commerce taught him more than just the ups and downs of trade. They revealed the cracks in the Qing dynasty's economic model. The dynasty's policies were as outdated as a dusty scroll, failing to keep pace with the rapid changes brought about by global trade. Foreign powers were carving up China like a roast duck at a banquet, and Zheng knew that something had to give. His vision of economic reform was born from this very tension, a desire to protect his homeland from being swallowed whole by foreign interests. The world was changing, and Zheng was determined not to let his country be left behind. It was a bold vision for a young man who learned through trial, error, and a fair share of awkward negotiations. He wasn't just a merchant, he was a thinker, a reformist, and perhaps most importantly, a bridge between two worlds. His early forays into business were just the opening act of a much larger story, one that would see him become a key figure in the push for China's modernization. But for now, he was just a young man with big ideas, trying to navigate a world that was spinning faster than a silk loom. As Zheng Guanying entered his midlife, he found himself in the throes of a classic existential crisis, one that would make a Shakespearean hero feel right at home. Here was a man who had successfully navigated the treacherous waters of commerce, only to find himself becalmed in a sea of outdated traditions and a country stubbornly resistant to change. His worldview was a cocktail of Confucian ethics, capitalist moxie, and a dash of reformist zeal, a concoction potent enough to give any bureaucrat a headache. During these tumultuous years, Zheng penned his most influential work, Words of Warning to a Prosperous Age, published in 1893. Now, this wasn't your average bedtime read. It was a hard-hitting manifesto that kicked down the door of complacency and demanded China's elite take a good, long look in the mirror. The book was a clarion call for modernization, a plea to drag the Qing dynasty kicking and screaming into the 20th century. Zheng argued that China's prosperity was as fragile as a paper tiger, and that without reform the nation was as doomed as a sandcastle at high tide. Zheng's writings didn't just ruffle feathers, they plucked the entire chicken. He critiqued everything from the crumbling education system to the bloated bureaucracy, pointing out that China's government officials were about as efficient as a one-legged man in a butt-kicking contest. He championed the adoption of Western technology and economic practices, urging his countrymen to embrace railways, telegraphs, and modern banking as tools of national salvation. In Zheng's view, these innovations were not just shiny gadgets. They were lifelines to a future where China could stand toe-to-toe with the Western powers. But Zheng wasn't just a man of words, he was a man of action, albeit with a penchant for unconventional methods. You see, spreading reformist ideas in the late Qing dynasty was a bit like trying to sell ice to Eskimos. The audience was skeptical, to say the least. So, Zheng turned to some rather peculiar marketing strategies to get his message across. Picture this: pamphlets, street performances, and public debates that were part political rally, part theatrical spectacle. Zheng understood that to capture the public's imagination, you sometimes had to dress your ideas in the gaudy costumes of entertainment. One of his more curious tactics involved hiring street performers to act out scenes depicting the benefits of modernization. Imagine a bustling Chinese marketplace where vendors cried their wares and the scent of street food hung heavy in the air. In the midst of this cacophony, actors would stage impromptu plays illustrating the wonders of steam engines and the horrors of foreign domination. It was a bit like watching a morality play with a side of economic theory, a spectacle designed to educate as much as entertain. And then there were the pamphlets. These weren't your run-of-the-mill flyers, they were mini manifestos, packed with enough rhetorical dynamite to blow the cobwebs off even the most conservative minds. Zheng distributed them with the fervour of a modern-day influencer, determined to reach as wide an audience as possible. He knew that getting people to read was only half the battle. The real challenge was making them care enough to act. Of course, not everyone was on board with Zheng's ideas. The Qing dynasty was teetering on the brink of collapse, and its officials were about as receptive to change as a cat to a cold shower. Many saw Zheng's calls for reform as a direct threat to their power and privilege. But Zheng was nothing if not persistent, a dogged reformer who understood that the wheels of change turn slowly, especially when they're mired in centuries of tradition. The stakes were high. The Treaty of Shimonoseki had just been signed in 1895, marking the end of the First Sino-Japanese War and resulting in China's humiliating defeat and loss of Taiwan. This was a wake-up call if ever there was one, akin to a bucket of ice water dumped over the head of a sleeping giant. It was a national embarrassment that underscored the urgency of Zheng's message, adapt or perish. Zheng's midlife crisis, then, wasn't the self-indulgent navel-gazing of a wealthy merchant bored with his riches. It was a profound reckoning with the state of his nation, a realization that the path to prosperity required not just economic shifts, but a wholesale transformation of values and priorities. It was about more than just saving China from foreign encroachment. It was about crafting a future where Chinese innovation and tradition could coexist in harmony. As he juggled his roles, businessman, writer, reformer, Zheng walked a tightrope, balancing the weight of his ambitions against the resistance of a society entrenched in its ways. His was a vision of a reformed China, one that could compete on the world stage without losing its soul. It was a dream as audacious as it was necessary, and one that would continue to resonate long after Zheng had shuffled off this mortal coil. Yet, even as he pushed for change, Zheng knew that the road ahead was fraught with challenges. The Qing dynasty was a sinking ship, its sails tattered by corruption and its hull breached by foreign cannons. But Zheng was determined to keep bailing water, convinced that with enough effort the ship could be righted. He believed in the resilience of his people and the power of ideas to reshape reality, a faith that would come to define his legacy. In the end, Zheng's story is one of contradiction and complexity, a tale of a man caught between the past and the future, tradition and innovation. It is a story that speaks to the universal struggle to reconcile identity with progress, to find one's place in a world that is constantly changing. And as the sun set on Zheng's midlife crisis, the stage was set for the next act in his extraordinary life, a chapter that would see him continue to fight for a vision of China that was as daring as it was hopeful. But for now, the curtain closes on this chapter with the promise of more to come. As the curtain rises on Zheng Guanying's next act, we find ourselves in a China that's caught in a political tug-of-war, and Zheng is smack in the middle of it, like a referee at a boxing match where both fighters are blindfolded. The Qing dynasty was hanging on by a thread, its officials more interested in preserving their cushy gigs than heeding Zheng's battle cries for reform. It was a bureaucratic mess of epic proportions, with layers of officials thicker than a Peking duck. The irony? Zheng's ideas were as appealing as ever, yet as welcome as a bull in a china shop. Enter the late 19th century political scene, a landscape as treacherous as a snake pit. The Qing officials had mastered the art of saying no while appearing to say yes, a kind of bureaucratic jiu-jitsu that would make any modern politician proud. Zheng's proposals for modernization, though groundbreaking, often met with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for a tax audit. After all, change is hard, especially when you're cozy in your antiquated armchair. The Qing government was like a house with termites, outwardly grand, but crumbling from within. Corruption was rampant, and officials skimmed more off the top than a barista with a bad attitude. Zheng's attempts to push for change were akin to trying to teach a cat to fetch. It was a noble effort, but likely to end in frustration. Yet, there was something about Zheng's tireless persistence that kept him in the game, like a marathon runner who refuses to quit, even when the race is uphill both ways. Amidst this bureaucratic chaos, Zheng encountered a rogues gallery of characters that could fill a Dickens novel. There were mandarins whose palms were as greasy as a street vendor's wok, and foreign diplomats who treated diplomacy like a game of chess, with China as the pawn. One particularly colourful figure was Li Hongzhong, a high-ranking Qing official with a penchant for diplomacy and a knack for playing both sides like a fiddle. Li was a savvy politician, the kind of guy who could sell water to a fish, yet even he struggled to navigate the labyrinthine corridors of Qing politics. Zheng's interactions with these officials were often comical, if not downright absurd. Imagine trying to discuss the merits of modern banking with someone who thinks a ledger is a mythical creature. Zheng's reform proposals were met with blank stares, polite nods, and the occasional snore. It was as if he was speaking a foreign language, which, in a way, he was. The language of progress in a world that spoke only tradition. Despite the resistance, Zheng's ideas did manage to seep through the cracks, like water finding its way through a leaky roof. Some officials began to see the writing on the wall, recognizing that ignoring the need for change was about as wise as ignoring a fire in the kitchen. Zheng's publications started to circulate more widely, not just among scholars but also among the emerging class of Chinese entrepreneurs who saw the potential for a modernized China. These were the people who understood that clinging to the past was a one-way ticket to irrelevance. Zheng's knack for communication didn't hurt either. He knew how to package his ideas in ways that were as accessible as they were compelling. His ability to translate complex economic theories into everyday language was a skill that made him a sort of 19th-century influencer, long before the age of TikTok and Twitter. And let's face it, when it comes to winning hearts and minds, being relatable is half the battle. Meanwhile, on the international stage, Zheng had a front-row seat to the diplomatic circus that was late 19th-century China. Foreign powers were jostling for influence like shoppers at a Black Friday sale, each eager to carve out their piece of the Chinese pie. The Treaty of Shimonoseki had been a bitter pill to swallow, and it was clear that the Western powers weren't going to play nice. They smelled blood in the water, and the Qing dynasty was the floundering fish. Zheng's dealings with foreign diplomats were a lesson in cultural exchange, with all the grace and subtlety of a bullfight. He encountered diplomats who ranged from the astute to the downright eccentric, each with their own agendas and quirks. There were British envoys who clung to their tea and crumpets as if they were lifelines, and French diplomats who draped everything in a veneer of sophistication, even when discussing gunboat diplomacy. Then there were the Americans who brought a can-do spirit but often lacked the nuance of their European counterparts. Through it all, Zheng maintained his characteristic wit and tenacity. He knew that diplomacy was a game of patience, and he was more than willing to play the long game. After all, history is written by those who endure, and Zheng was nothing if not enduring. He understood that transforming China was not a sprint, but a marathon, and he was determined to keep running, even when the finish line seemed perpetually out of reach. The political and economic environment of late 19th century China was a powder keg, and Zheng was the catalyst looking to ignite change. His vision of a modernized China was not just a pipe dream, but a necessity, one that would eventually resonate with the next generation of reformers. But for now, the road ahead was winding and fraught with challenges, with Zheng juggling the roles of reformer, diplomat, and eternal optimist. In the end, Zheng Guanying was a man ahead of his time, a visionary who saw the potential for a China that could stand proud on the world stage. His ideas, though often met with resistance, laid the groundwork for the seismic shifts that would eventually reshape the nation. And while the Qing officials may have been slow to embrace change, the seeds of reform had been planted, waiting to take root in the fertile soil of a new century. As we leave Zheng for now, navigating the bureaucratic maze with the persistence of a determined terrier, the stage is set for the next chapter of his journey. A story of resilience and revolution in a world on the brink of transformation. Stay tuned, because if history has taught us anything, it's that the most compelling stories are the ones that refuse to be silenced. And so, as Zheng Guanying marched forward through the unraveling fabric of late Qing China, he was both a beacon of hope and a harbinger of chaos, a man with a vision in a land blurred by myopic leadership. If you think the Qing dynasty was a bit of a circus, you're not wrong. It was more like a three-ring spectacle where the clowns ran the administration and the acrobats were trying to balance on a seesaw of outdated traditions and dire reform needs. Zheng's ideas found fertile ground in the early 20th century reform movements, which were sprouting like daisies through the cracks of a crumbling empire. Reformers like Kang Yue and Liang Qichao were taking notes from Zheng's playbook, realizing that his vision of modernization wasn't just pie-in-the-sky dreaming, but a roadmap for survival in a world turning faster than a silk spindle. By 1901, the Boxer Rebellion had already left its mark, forcing the Qing court to consider reforms with the enthusiasm of a cat being dragged to a bath. Zheng's influence was particularly evident in the self-strengthening movement, where leaders tried to blend Western technology with Chinese essence. It was like trying to make a smoothie out of soy sauce and a cheeseburger. Not an easy sell, but Zheng's eloquence and logic gave it some traction. His advocacy for railways, telegraphs, and modern education was a clarion call that resonated with reformers who were tired of riding ox carts while the rest of the world zipped by in locomotives. But here's where the rubber met the road, or rather, where the railway met the cow field. In one of the more comical episodes of Zheng's reform saga, a newly planned railway line abruptly ended in a bucolic pasture, home to more cows than commuters. It was a metaphor as rich as it was ridiculous, a nation poised on the brink of modernity, yet tethered to the whims of feudal inefficiency. The railway debacle highlighted the absurdity of trying to graft modern infrastructure onto a system that was about as organized as a toddler's toy chest. Zheng's contemporaries reacted to his ideas with a mix of admiration and bewilderment, much like someone watching a magician pull a rabbit out of a hat, only to reveal it was actually a pigeon. On one hand, Zheng's vision was inspiring, a blueprint for a future where China could not just survive but thrive. On the other, his ideas were met with the kind of skepticism usually reserved for snake oil salesmen. After all, the notion of embracing Western technology and economic practices was as radical as suggesting that mandarins swapped their silk robes for business suits. And yet, for every skeptic, there were those who saw the potential in Zheng's plans. Entrepreneurs and intellectuals began to rally around his ideas, forming the backbone of what would become a burgeoning reformist movement. They understood that while the Qing Empire was floundering like a ship caught in a storm, Zheng's visions were lifeboats, albeit ones with a few leaks. Let's not forget the economic context that made Zheng's ideas more than just intellectual exercises. By the early 1900s, China's GDP was a shadow of its former glory, thanks in part to unequal treaties and foreign exploitation. Zheng's proposals for economic reform were not just clever musings, they were strategic necessities. He advocated for modern banking systems, industrialization, and international trade relations, recognizing that economic strength was the backbone of national sovereignty. It was a forward-thinking approach in a land that often seemed stuck in reverse gear. But Zheng's path was not without its obstacles. The Qing court, clinging to power with desperation, viewed reform as a threat rather than an opportunity. To them, Zheng's blueprints for change were akin to dismantling the walls of the Forbidden City to build a McDonald's. There was an undeniable tension between the old guard and the new wave of reformers, a tug-of-war that would ultimately shape China's destiny. Despite these challenges, Zheng remained an indefatigable force. His ability to articulate complex ideas in relatable terms made him a beacon for those seeking change. His writings circulated like wildfire, sparking debates and discussions that would lay the groundwork for future reform. The seeds he planted found fertile soil among China's emerging intellectual class, who were eager to shed the chains of antiquated Confucian orthodoxy in favor of a modern, progressive society. As the Qing dynasty continued its slow-motion collapse, Zheng's ideas gained traction beyond the borders of China. International observers began to take note of the reformist undercurrents in the Middle Kingdom, recognizing that while the Qing might have been on life support, the spirit of its people was anything but dormant. Zheng's vision for a modern China was not just a domestic affair, it was a global conversation. In the end, Zheng Guanying was a man of contradictions, a traditionalist with a modernist's heart, a reformer navigating a conservative landscape. His story is a lesson in the power of ideas to transcend the shackles of outdated institutions, and a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, change is possible. As his ideas continued to ferment in the minds of China's reformers, they set the stage for the seismic shifts that would soon redefine the nation. And so, as we leave Zheng poised on the precipice of transformation, the stage is set for the next chapter in China's tumultuous journey. The echoes of Zheng's vision would continue to reverberate throughout the early 20th century, shaping the contours of a new China. The story isn't over yet. There's a revolution on the horizon, and Zheng's ideas are about to take center stage in ways even he might not have imagined. Stay tuned, because the most exciting part of the tale is yet to unfold. As Guanying's ideas hovered on the cusp of a seismic shift, one couldn't help but wonder what he'd make of the modern China landscape, skyscrapers that scrape the sky, and bullet trains that zip by faster than an emperor's decree. Would he marvel at the sheer scale of it all, or shake his head at the chaotic blend of tradition and modernity? Zheng passed away in 1922, but his legacy was like a stubborn weed, rooted deep and destined to bloom in unexpected ways. First off, let's dispel a few myths about Zheng as this untouchable reformist hero, cast in the mold of a Confucian sage. Sure, he was visionary, but the path he trod was littered with more than a few banana peels. His life was a tapestry of trial and error, a giant game of snakes and ladders where the snakes seemed to multiply just when the ladders appeared. The reality? Zheng's journey was less a straight arrow and more a series of loops and spirals, the kind you'd see in a toddler's scribbles. Zheng's ideas were like seeds scattered by a strong wind, some taking root in the fertile minds of future reformers. By the time the early 20th century got its chaotic act together, several of Zheng's proposals had wormed their way into the national discourse. His advocacy for infrastructure, education, and economic reform was echoed in the policies of the Republic of China, established in 1912, a decade before his death. The irony? The Qing dynasty finally collapsed under the weight of its ineptitude, like a house of cards built on quicksand. Yet Zheng's vision lived on, a blueprint for a more progressive China. Fast forward to the late 20th century, and China's modernization efforts were in full swing, with leaders like Deng Xiaoping taking notes from Zheng's old playbook. Deng's economic reforms were a nod to Zheng's early insights, albeit with a modern twist. A capitalist twist, if you will. By the 1980s, China was opening its economy like a flower in bloom, inviting foreign investment and technological advancement. Zheng would have likely given a knowing nod, recognizing the echoes of his ideas in the rapid industrialization and economic liberalization that followed. Now, if you think the transition from a feudal empire to a modern nation was a neat, organized affair, you'd be as mistaken as someone expecting a panda to perform ballet. The process was messy, chaotic, and at times downright comedic. Take, for instance, the anecdotes of early industrialization attempts, where machinery imported from the West often ended up more decorative than functional, gathering dust like relics in a forgotten museum. Yet, through the fumbling and the failures, a new China was emerging, pieced together like a puzzle with a few missing pieces. Zheng's influence was particularly poignant in the realm of education. His calls for modernizing the schooling system resonated with reformers who understood that knowledge was power. By the mid-20th century, educational reforms were producing a new generation of thinkers and leaders, ready to tackle the challenges of a rapidly changing world. Zheng would have likely been thrilled to see this, given his belief that education was the cornerstone of progress, much like tofu is the foundation of a good stir-fry. And then there's the matter of infrastructure. Zheng's vision of railways and telegraphs as the arteries of a modern nation was a harbinger of things to come. By 2019, China boasted the world's largest high-speed rail network, stretching over 35,000 kilometers. That's roughly the distance from Earth to the Moon, if the Moon were a little closer and had a penchant for fast travel. Zheng's dream of a connected China was realized, albeit with trains that moved a bit faster than the ox carts of his day. But let's not paint too rosy a picture here. The path to modernization was fraught with its own set of challenges, and not all of Zheng's dreams were realized in the way he might have hoped. The clash between tradition and modernity was, and still is, a dance of contradictions. One step forward, two steps back, with occasional twirls that leave everyone dizzy. China's rapid development came with growing pains, including environmental challenges and social upheavals, issues that would have given Zheng pause had he been around to witness them. Zheng's legacy is a testament to the power of ideas, even when those ideas are met with skepticism and resistance. His story is a reminder that progress is rarely linear, often requiring a detour through the absurd before reaching the destination. Zheng might have chuckled at the thought of his early reform proposals becoming the bedrock of modern China, a nation that now stands as a global powerhouse. As we wrap up our journey through Zheng's life and legacy, let's ponder what he'd think of today's China. Would he marvel at the technological marvels and economic miracles, or would he critique the path taken to get there? Perhaps he'd do a bit of both, recognizing that the journey of modernization is as much about the bumps in the road as it is about the smooth stretches. After all, the road to progress is seldom a straight line. It's more like a winding path with unexpected detours and the occasional comedic misstep. In the end, Zheng Guanying's story is one of perseverance, vision, and the relentless pursuit of a better tomorrow. His ideas outlived him, shaping the course of Chinese history in ways both profound and unexpected. So here's to Zheng, a reformist whose seeds of change continue to bloom long after the final curtain has fallen on his extraordinary life. And remember, when it comes to history, the most compelling tales are those that refuse to fade away, echoing through time with lessons that are as relevant today as they were over a century ago. You're nestled in the heart of 17th century Isfahan, a city bustling with the vibrant hum of life, where the air is thick with the scent of spices and the promise of artistry. The morning sun peeks over the horizon, casting a golden hue on the tiled domes and minarets that dot the skyline. As a Persian painter, your day begins not with a leisurely cup of coffee, but with the clamorous noise of the bazaar and the relentless pursuit of pigments. In this age, where art is more than a mere hobby, it's the lifeblood of your existence. A morning without plans for a new commission is as unthinkable as a canvas without colour. Your journey starts with a pilgrimage of sorts, albeit one that doesn't involve any sacred shrines. Instead, you're headed to the marketplace. Your mission? To procure the materials that will transform blank parchment into a masterpiece of Persian miniature art. You maneuver through the throng of merchants and buyers, your eyes peeled for the familiar gleam of lapis lazuli. This vibrant blue stone is the crown jewel of your pigments, a colour so prized that it costs a small fortune. Think of it as the Ferrari of the 17th century art world. The finest quality could set you back as much as 100 dinars per ounce, a price justified by its captivating hue and the status it conferred upon any artwork. But pigment alone isn't enough. There's the matter of gold leaf, a must-have for any self-respecting artist looking to add a touch of opulence to their work. This isn't just decoration, it's a statement, a declaration of mastery and wealth. Yet, with its luxury comes a hefty price tag. Gold leaf cost can vary wildly depending on the whims of trade and the fluctuating fortunes of the Safavid Empire. A sheet might cost the equivalent of a week's wages, but its shimmer is irresistible, a siren call to any patron with a taste for the finer things in life. Back in your workshop, the real magic begins. The tools of your trade are humble, yet refined. Fine brushes made from the hairs of squirrels or cats, perfect for the delicate strokes required in miniature painting. Your canvas is typically paper or parchment, the surface prepped with a smooth layer of gesso to ensure the pigments adhere with the vibrancy of a peacock's feathers. There's a technique to this, a rhythm that feels almost like a dance as you grind pigments on a stone slab, mixing them with water or gum arabic to create the perfect consistency. In an age where Instagram filters and Photoshop are centuries away, achieving the perfect shade requires a meticulous eye and a steady hand. This isn't just art, it's a science, a complex alchemy that transforms raw materials into works that captivate emperors and commoners alike. Yet, for all its beauty, this process is fraught with challenges. The economic reality of being a painter in the Safavid era is no Monet painting, more of a juggling act where each commission is a gamble. A single job could catapult you into the courtly halls of fame or leave you scraping by, hoping to sell enough pieces just to cover your next meal. It's a high-stakes game where talent must be matched by shrewd negotiation skills. Depending on the patron, a commission could earn you anywhere from a modest 500 dinars to a jaw-dropping 10,000, enough to keep your workshop bustling for months or even a year. But let's not romanticize it too much. For every artist living the high life, there's another eking out a precarious existence. The Safavid court is a fickle beast, its tastes as changeable as the seasons. One month, you're the toast of Isfahan, the next, you're yesterday's news, left to ponder whether you should have pursued a more stable career like goat herding. Still, the allure of painting, the chance to create something timeless, is a powerful draw. It's a daily existence filled with both the mundane and the magical. As you mix the perfect shade of azure, you can almost feel the weight of centuries watching, as if every brushstroke is part of a larger tapestry, one where your voice, however small, adds to the chorus of Persian artistic tradition. And so, as the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across your workshop, you pause for a moment, brush in hand. The day has been a whirlwind of activity, a blend of artistry and commerce, a dance with history itself. You may not know what tomorrow will bring. Another commission, perhaps, or a day spent scouring for pigments. But for now, there's contentment in knowing that with each stroke of your brush, you're part of something enduring, something that will outlast the shifting sands of the desert and the ever-turning wheels of fortune. As the moon rises, bathing the city in a silvery glow, you ponder the real movers and shakers of your world, the patrons. These are the power players who can transform your status with a single commission. Think of them as the venture capitalists of the 17th century Persian art scene. If a wealthy merchant or a powerful Shah likes your work, your name spreads faster than the latest bizarre gossip, and your next meal becomes a sumptuous feast instead of a meagre affair. In this era, your artistic fate is often in the hands of the Safavid Shahs. These rulers weren't just content with conquering lands, they wanted to conquer the realm of beauty and culture too. Shah Abbas I, for example, was the Steve Jobs of his time when it came to patronage, curating an empire of talent. His keen eye for art meant that a nod of approval from him could be a golden ticket, or at least a well-inked one. But don't think it's all about charm and talent. No, in this competitive hothouse of creativity, you need tact, political savvy, and probably a bit of luck. The royal workshops are just as much about manoeuvring as they are about painting. Imagine being in a room full of artists, each one just as talented and ambitious as you are. It's like a reality TV show minus the cameras and with a lot more calligraphy. The competition can be cutthroat. You might find yourself painting side by side with the best and the brightest, each vying for the attention of the same patrons. One misstep, one ill-timed remark, and you could be out on your ear, your only audience, the pigeons in the square. You see, royal patronage is a double-edged sword. It can elevate you to dizzying heights, but it can also slice your career to shreds if you don't play your cards right. And let's not forget the merchants, the unsung heroes of the art world. They're the ones who keep the economy ticking, bringing in goods from distant lands and, occasionally, a taste for the finer things. When a merchant commissions a piece, it's not just about art, it's an investment. They want something that speaks volumes about their status, something that'll make their fellow traders green with envy. So you learn to cater to their tastes, to balance their demands with your artistic vision, a juggling act that would make any circus performer proud. Yet, beneath this glamorous veneer, there's a murky undercurrent of intrigue. The court is a labyrinth of alliances and rivalries, where a well-placed whisper can change fortunes overnight. Political intrigue is as common as the ubiquitous saffron in Persian cuisine. Align yourself with the wrong faction, and you might find your art and your life hanging by a thread. It's a dance on a knife edge, where every word and brushstroke could tip the balance. Maintaining good relationships with patrons isn't just advisable, it's essential. You need to be part diplomat, part artist, and occasionally part spy. Networking is key, and it's not just about schmoozing at the latest feast. It's about understanding the shifting sands of power, knowing when to lay low and when to seize the moment. It's a game of chess where the stakes are your livelihood and reputation. But why do you, with a paintbrush in hand, step into this swirling vortex of ambition and politics? Because the rewards are worth it. Not just the financial gain, though that's certainly nothing to scoff at, it's about legacy. To create something that might hang in the halls of a palace, admired by generations, is a heady prospect. The allure is irresistible, even if the path is fraught with peril. As the city quiets down and you lay your brushes to rest, you reflect on the tightrope walk that is your career. It's a life where art and politics are inseparably intertwined, where every brushstroke is a gamble, every commission a leap of faith. But isn't that part of the allure? The thrill of creating amidst the chaos, of leaving your mark in a world that's ever-changing? And so, you prepare for another day, ready to face whatever challenges and opportunities the vibrant city of Isfahan has in store for you next. As the city of Isfahan hums with the quiet lull of night, your thoughts meander to the tales and traditions that light the path of your art, as much as any patron's coin ever could. It's the 17th century, and you're a Persian painter navigating a landscape where every brushstroke is infused with the weight of centuries-old customs and rich storytelling traditions. You're not just painting pictures, you're crafting visual narratives that echo the soul of Persian culture, drawing inspiration from the poetic verses of the Shahnameh and the intricate beauty of Islamic art. Now, you might be thinking, rules, and more rules, what's the fun in that? But here's a twist. These constraints are like a tightly wound spring, bursting with potential energy. Sure, Islamic art shies away from depicting animate beings in religious contexts, leading to a flourishing of abstract and geometric designs. Think of it as the original abstract art movement centuries before Picasso came onto the scene. But this doesn't stifle creativity, it channels it into new forms. The swirling arabesques and tessellations become a dance of colour and form, each pattern a meditation on infinity. Your work also draws heavily from the Shahnameh, the Persian epic that's the literary equivalent of a blockbuster movie franchise. This isn't just any old book, it's the opus of Persian culture, authored by Ferdowsi around 1010 AD. Its tales of kings and heroes, triumphs and tragedies aren't just stories. They're cultural bedrock. Translating these narratives into miniature paintings is like trying to capture the grandeur of a Hollywood epic on a postage stamp. No pressure. The Shahnameh provides a rich tapestry of imagery, from the brave Rostam battling mythical beasts to the tragic romance of Shirin and Fahad. Each scene is a canvas within a canvas, requiring not just technical skill, but a deep understanding of symbolism. A hero's cloak might be painted in a vibrant red, not just for its visual impact, but to symbolize courage. The color green could hint at paradise, echoing Islamic themes of eternal gardens. It's all about layering meanings like an intricate baklava, each bite revealing a new nuance. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. There are hurdles to overcome. You're expected to adhere to certain norms, and stepping outside those lines can be as welcome as a sandstorm during a picnic. Yet, within these boundaries, there's a surprising amount of freedom. It's like playing a game of chess where the rules are set, but the strategies are endless. The challenge lies in pushing the limits of expression without crossing into forbidden territory. A subtle shift in hue, a clever play on perspective, these are your secret weapons. And then there's the cultural expectation to balance narrative and aesthetics. Your patrons want a visual feast, but also a story that resonates, a dual demand that can feel like trying to juggle while riding a unicycle. Yet, the satisfaction of achieving this balance is akin to completing a complex puzzle, every piece slotting perfectly into place. When your patrons see their favourite stories come to life with such vivid detail, their delight is palpable, and your reputation as a master storyteller in paint is secured. Amidst this artistic balancing act, economic realities are never far from your mind. You're constantly weighing the cost of materials against the potential payout of commissions. Each ounce of lapis lazuli, each sheet of gold leaf is a calculated risk. It's a bit like betting on a horse race, but with paintbrushes instead of racehorses. A well-executed Shahnameh scene could fetch a handsome sum, enough to keep you in pigments and paper for months. But it's not just about the money, right? It's about leaving a mark. As you lay each brushstroke, you're contributing to a living tradition, one that's as much about cultural continuity as it is about personal expression. You're part of a lineage of artists stretching back through the centuries, each one adding their own chapter to the grand narrative of Persian art. There's also a sense of camaraderie in this shared endeavour. You're not alone in your workshop. Other artists, calligraphers and craftsmen are part of this vibrant community. You swap stories, tips, and maybe a few trade secrets. Each interaction a reminder that while the path of an artist can be solitary, it's also deeply interconnected. It's a tapestry of shared experiences and collective wisdom, weaving together a support network that's as intricate as any pattern you paint. As the night deepens, you find yourself contemplating the paradox of your craft. Art in the Persian world is both timeless and ever-changing, rooted in tradition yet constantly evolving. It's a dance between the old and the new, where every brushstroke is a dialogue with history. You're not just painting, you're conversing with the past, each piece a new chapter in the ongoing story of Persian art. And with that, you lay down your brushes, your mind already buzzing with ideas for the next day. What new stories will you tell? What colours will you weave into your next masterpiece? The possibilities are as endless as the desert sands and as compelling as the stories they inspire. You may be bound by tradition, but within those bounds, the creative horizon stretches infinitely, each day offering a new canvas to explore. As you set your brushes down for the night, your thoughts drift towards the myths that swirl around the Persian painters of your era. Ah, the romanticized image, the leisurely artist, lounging in luxury, sipping wine as inspiration flows like the waters of the Zayande River. It's a picturesque scene, the kind that would make for a fantastic oil painting on its own. But let's peel back the layers on this particular canvas, shall we? Firstly, that notion of endless leisure and indulgence. A bit of a stretch, like trying to use a cat's whisker as a brush for a broad stroke. Sure, some painters found themselves in the good graces of wealthy patrons, and yes, a select few might have enjoyed a taste of the finer things. But for the vast majority, life was less about lounging and more about hustle. Picture this: the relentless quest for patrons, the constant negotiations over commissions, and the ever-present anxiety of staying relevant in the fickle world of Safavid art. The truth is, most Persian painters were more akin to freelancers today, except without the luxury of a cozy home office. They navigated a delicate balance between artistry and commerce, where each piece had to be both a masterpiece and a marketable commodity. And let's talk about those workshops. Far from the serene retreats of legend, they were bustling hives of activity, where collaboration and competition walked hand in hand. Now, let's debunk another popular fairy tale. The idea that Persian paintings were purely about aesthetic beauty, detached from the gritty realities of life. The fact is, these artworks often served as subtle commentaries on the social and political landscapes of the time. Take, for example, the frequent depictions of courtly life, not just as a celebration of opulence, but as a mirror reflecting the complex hierarchies and power dynamics within the Safavid Empire. It's art as a form of dialogue, not just decoration. But where would any good myth be without a touch of exoticism, right? Enter the Western fascination with Oriental art, a term that conjures images of mystique and opulence but often veils the true essence of Persian culture. The Western world, upon encountering Persian miniature art, found itself both enchanted and bewildered. To them, it was a window into a world both familiar and foreign, a paradox wrapped in vibrant hues. Yet, their interpretations were often more fantasy than fact, painting a picture as skewed as a funhouse mirror. Western collectors in the 17th and 18th centuries hungrily snapped up these artworks, drawn in by their intricate detail and perceived exotic allure. But in doing so, they often missed the deeper cultural and historical significance embedded within each brushstroke. Instead, Persian art became a symbol of the mysterious East, a stereotype that persists in various forms to this day. The irony? While these Western audiences were busy romanticizing the past, Persian artists were using their work to engage with the present, addressing themes as varied as love, power, and spiritual devotion. This fascination wasn't just a one-sided affair. The increased demand from European collectors actually contributed to a flourishing trade, influencing Persian art in unexpected ways. European techniques and materials began to seep into the Persian artistic lexicon, creating a cross-cultural dialogue that was as enriching as it was complex. It was a bit like adding a pinch of saffron to a dish, subtle yet transformative. Yet, even as it opened new avenues, this Western interest also perpetuated misconceptions. Many Europeans saw Persian art as a relic of a bygone era, not realizing that it was very much a living, evolving tradition. They were captivated by the surface allure, often failing to appreciate the cultural conversations happening beneath the ornate patterns and lush colors. But let's shift our gaze for a moment to the authentic voices of the time, those primary sources that offer a more grounded view. Manuscripts and letters from Persian artists themselves often reveal a different story, one of dedication, struggle, and an insatiable drive to create. These artists were not mere artisans. They were innovators, constantly pushing the boundaries of their medium within the constraints of tradition. Take the writings of Reza Abbasi, one of the most renowned painters of the Safavid era. His work, characterized by its fluid lines and expressive figures, speaks volumes about the artistic evolution happening in the court of Shah Abbas I. Abbasi's letters hint at the pressures of court life, where the pursuit of artistic excellence was as much about survival as it was about passion. His experiences remind us that even the most celebrated artists were not immune to the whims of their patrons or the volatile tides of political change. So, what's the real takeaway here? Persian painters were not the aloof, otherworldly figures that some myths would have us believe. They were deeply engaged with their world, their art serving as both a reflection and a critique of the society around them. They were masters of their craft, yes, but also shrewd navigators of the complex social and economic landscapes that defined their era. In the end, the myth of the Persian painter is as layered as the art itself, a blend of romance and reality, of legend and life. It's a reminder that art is never created in a vacuum. It is born from the interplay of cultural, economic, and personal forces. And as you ponder these truths, you realize that the real story of Persian painting is far richer and more nuanced than any fairy tale could ever capture. As you prepare for another day in the vibrant world of 17th century Isfahan, you're reminded that the history of art is not just about the masterpieces left behind, but the stories of those who dared to create them amidst the ever-shifting sands of their time. The myths may paint a pretty picture, but the reality, with all its complexities and contradictions, is where the true artistry lies. And isn't that the most compelling canvas of all? And so, as you close this chapter of history, you're faced with a truth as intricate as the Persian miniatures themselves. The legacy of 17th century Persian art is a tapestry woven with threads of cultural exchange, artistic innovation, and timeless beauty. These painters weren't merely creators of pretty pictures, they were cultural ambassadors, their work echoing across centuries and borders like a drop of ink spreading on parchment. It's a legacy that has left an indelible mark on the canvas of art history, shaping perceptions and inspiring generations. Now, let's talk about influence, a word that gets thrown around as liberally as saffron in Persian cuisine. The impact of these Persian painters was more than just a local affair. Their art, with its intricate designs and vivid storytelling, lit a creative fuse that would spark inspiration far beyond the borders of the Safavid Empire. Fast forward to the 18th and 19th centuries, and you see European artists and collectors swooning over these miniatures, their influence seeping into Rococo's love of ornamentation and Romanticism's penchant for the exotic. The vibrant colours and detailed compositions of Persian art became the muse for many a Western painter, turning their notion of art on its head. Yet, while Europe was busy importing Persian aesthetics, the influences weren't one-way traffic. Persian art itself was in dialogue with the world, absorbing elements from Chinese designs, Ottoman motifs, and even Indian themes. This was a time when the artistic world was a melting pot, long before globalization became a buzzword. As Persian artists adopted and adapted these elements, they created a unique style that was as much about innovation as it was about tradition. This cross-cultural pollination enriched Persian art, making it a dynamic and evolving tradition rather than a static relic. But hold your horses before you think it was all sunshine and roses. The path to legacy is often paved with thorns. As political powers shifted and the Safavid Empire eventually crumbled, the status of the Persian painter was not immune to the turbulence. With the empire's decline in the early 18th century, the lavish patronage that had once fueled artistic endeavours began to wane. Economic hardships meant that painters had to adapt, often turning to other crafts or seeking patrons outside the court. This period tested the resilience of Persian art, but it also underscored its adaptability, a trait that would ensure its survival. Let's not forget the myth-busting reality here. While Persian art was being celebrated and collected abroad, it faced the challenge of being seen as a quaint curiosity rather than a living tradition. Western collectors, enamored by its exotic flair, often failed to appreciate the cultural nuances and the profound narratives woven into each piece. Yet, despite these misinterpretations, Persian art continued to thrive, its legacy carried forward by a new generation of artists who embraced both their heritage and the changing world. Fast forward to today, and the legacy of 17th century Persian art continues to resonate. Modern Iranian artists draw inspiration from these historical foundations, creating works that honor their past while pushing new boundaries. Museums around the world proudly display Persian miniatures, each piece a testament to the skill and vision of those long-gone artists. And in a delicious twist of irony, the very elements that Western collectors once saw as exotic are now celebrated for their cultural authenticity and historical significance. So, what's the takeaway from this colorful saga? Persian painters weren't just artisans lost to history, they were cultural pioneers, their work a bridge between worlds, past and present. They remind us that art is a living conversation across time and space, a dialogue that transcends borders and defies easy categorization. The legacy of Persian art is not just in the beauty of its form, but in the depth of its impact, a testament to the power of creativity in the face of change. As you close the book on this vibrant era, remember that history is a mosaic of stories, each piece adding to the grand narrative of human experience. The Persian painters of the 17th century were more than mere shadows in forgotten manuscripts. They were voices that continue to speak, their art a timeless language that resonates through the corridors of time. And isn't that the true artistry of history? Its ability to connect us, across centuries and cultures, in a shared appreciation of the beauty and complexity of the human spirit?